Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Marcus Kellerman, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years now. I work the Blue Ridge Parkway up in Virginia, around milepost 217 near Grandfather Mountain. It's beautiful country, but it can be dangerous too. I know these mountains better than most folks know their own backyard. I wasn't always a ranger. Used to work in the coal mines down in West Virginia. But after my wife Sarah died in a car accident, I needed a change. Something clean and honest. Something where I could help people instead of digging holes in the earth. My twin daughters, Emma and Lucy, were only 8 when we moved up here. They're grown now, both in college, but they still call these mountains home. The thing about being a ranger is that people think it's all about giving directions and checking campsites. But when you work the deep wilderness like I do, you become something else. You become the person who goes where others can't or won't go. Cave rescue, that's my specialty. When someone gets lost or hurt in the limestone caves that honeycomb these mountains, they call me. I've pulled bodies out of Hellhole Cave, Devil's Bathtub, and a dozen other places that don't even have names. I've rappelled down 300-foot drops and crawled through passages so narrow you have to breathe out to fit through. After 16 years, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. The Cherokee people who lived here first, they had stories about these caves. They called something the Kekle Kudle, stone giants that lived deep underground. Old-timers still whisper about them sometimes, especially when someone goes missing in the cave systems. I always figured it was just folklore, something to scare kids away from dangerous places. But on October 28, 1963, I learned that some stories are true. It started like any other emergency call. 3 experienced cave explorers, ATS spelunkers, they call themselves, had gone into Hellhole Cave for a routine mapping expedition. They were supposed to be out by 6 in the evening. When they didn't show up by midnight, their families called us. Hellhole Cave isn't some tourist spot. It's a serious cave system that drops straight down into the mountain for over 400 feet. The temperature down there stays around 50 degrees year-round, and there are underground rivers that can flood without warning. Only experienced cavers go in there, and these 3 knew what they were doing. I got the call at my cabin at 2 in the morning. The voice on the radio was Tommy Morrison, our dispatcher. "Marcus, we got a situation at Hellhole. 3 cavers overdue. Emergency beacon activated about an hour ago, then went silent." Emergency beacons don't just go silent. They're built to work in the worst conditions. When I heard that, I knew something was wrong. I drove through the night to get there. October in the mountains means early snow, and there was already a light dusting on the ground. Fog banks rolled through the valleys like ghosts, thick enough that my headlights barely cut through them. The temperature was dropping fast, probably down to the 30s. When I reached the cave entrance, I found their truck parked exactly where it should be. Their equipment was laid out neat and organized. These weren't amateur weekend warriors. They had proper gear, proper training, and proper permits. But as I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. Usually, you'd hear owls, maybe a fox, rustling in the underbrush. But there was nothing. Even the wind had stopped. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I checked their equipment manifest. Everything was accounted for except what they would have taken underground: AMA, ropes, lights, emergency supplies. Their backup radio was still in the truck, turned on to the emergency frequency. If they'd gotten into trouble, they should have been able to call for help. As the sun came up, I assembled my cave rescue team. Beth Morrison, TCT Tommy's daughter, and our best junior ranger, arrived first. She was only 24 but had more cave experience than most people twice her age. Then came Doc Phillips, our medical officer, and Jake Sullivan, who handled the heavy rescue equipment. We checked our gear twice. Cave rescue isn't something you rush into. One mistake down there, and instead of rescuing 3 people, you become 4 more people who need rescuing. But as we prepared to descend, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Around the cave entrance, the trees were wrong. Not dead, exactly, but twisted. Their branches bent away from the opening like they were trying to get as far from it as possible. In 16 years of working these mountains, I'd never seen anything like it. Beth noticed it too. "Those trees," she said, pointing. "They look scared." I laughed, but it sounded forced even to me. Trees can't be scared. But looking at them, bent and twisted away from that dark opening in the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. We went down the main shaft at 8 in the morning. The entrance to Hellhole Cave is basically a large crack in the limestone that opens up into a vertical drop. We rappelled down on ropes, our helmet lights cutting through the darkness. Cave air has a particular smell: wet stone, old earth, and something else that's hard to describe. It's the smell of deep places, places where sunlight has never reached. But as we descended, I noticed something different. There was another smell mixed in with the familiar cave scents. Something sharp and bitter, like sulfur. The first 200 feet down went normally. We followed the main passage, checking for signs of the missing cavers. Beth called out their names every few minutes, and we listened for responses. Nothing but our own voices echoing back from the depths. Then, we found the first rope. It was their rope, no question about it. I recognized the bright blue climbing rope they'd been using, but it wasn't hanging where it should be. Instead, it was shredded. Not cut, shredded, like something with massive claws had torn through it. "Bear?" Beth asked, but her voice was uncertain. I examined the rope carefully. I've seen what bear claws can do to fabric and gear. This wasn't bear damage. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate, and they were huge. Whatever had made them had claws at least 6 inches long. We continued down. At the 300-foot mark, we reached the first major chamber. This is where most cavers would set up a base camp before exploring the deeper passages. We expected to find evidence that our missing people had been here. We found evidence, all right, but not what we expected. Their gear was there. Backpacks, extra rope, emergency supplies, but it was arranged wrong. Too neat. Too organized. Like someone had carefully placed each item in a specific spot. Cavers don't work that way. They drop gear where they need it, spread it around. This looked like someone had been playing with their stuff. And it was cold. Not cave cold, which is about 50 degrees. This was freezing cold. Our breath misted in front of our faces, and the limestone walls had a thin layer of frost on them. "This isn't right," Doc Phillips said. "Caves don't get this cold. The temperature should be constant." He was right. Cave temperature stays the same year-round because they're insulated by all that rock. But this chamber felt like the inside of a freezer. Beth was checking the gear when she called out. "Marcus, come look at this." She was kneeling next to one of the backpacks, shining her light on the ground. In the soft cave mud, there were tracks. Human boots heading deeper into the cave. But mixed in with them were other tracks. Bigger tracks. Much bigger. I knelt down to get a better look. The tracks were roughly human-shaped but enormous, at least 14 inches long and 6 inches wide. And deep. Whatever made them was heavy. Very heavy. "What could make tracks like that?" Beth asked. I didn't have an answer. In 16 years of cave rescue, I'd never seen anything like them. They looked almost human, but no human had feet that big. And the depth of the impressions suggested something that weighed at least 400 or 500 pounds. We followed the tracks deeper into the cave. The passage narrowed and widened, twisted left and right. Our helmet lights created moving shadows on the walls that seemed to dance and shift. The sulfur smell was getting stronger. Then our lights started acting up. It began with Beth's helmet light. It dimmed, flickered, then went out completely. She switched to her backup light, but the same thing happened. Then Doc's light failed. Then Jake's. Only my light was still working, and it was getting dimmer by the minute. "Equipment failure," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. Maybe moisture in the electrical connections. But our lights were sealed units, designed for cave work. They didn't just fail like this. Not all at the same time. We decided to retreat back to the chamber and check our equipment. But when we turned around, the passage looked different. Not wrong exactly, but not quite right either. Like someone had moved the walls a few inches while we weren't looking. "Did we take a wrong turn?" Beth asked. I consulted my map. According to my compass and the map, we were exactly where we should be. But the passage felt different. Wider in some places, narrower in others. After 16 years in these caves, I knew every twist and turn of hellhole. This wasn't the same passage we'd come down. We made it back to the chamber, but our equipment check didn't help. The lights worked fine until we tried to go deeper. Then they failed again. And that's when we heard it. A sound from somewhere far, below us. Not quite a roar, not quite a scream. Something that sounded like rocks grinding against each other, but with a voice behind it. It echoed up from the depths, bouncing off the limestone walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. We all froze. In 16 years of cave work, I'd heard plenty of strange sounds. Wind through narrow passages, water dripping, rocks settling. This wasn't any of those. This sounded alive. "What was that?" Beth whispered. Before I could answer, we heard it again. Closer this time. And underneath it, something else. Something that sounded almost like words, but in no language I'd ever heard. That's when Jake found the other rope, not on the ground where it should be if someone had dropped it. It was embedded in the limestone wall, 20 feet above the cave floor. The entire coil of rope pushed into solid stone like the rock was soft clay. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. You can't push rope into limestone. Limestone is hard rock. It takes specialized tools and considerable force just to drive a piton into it. But there it was. A full coil of climbing rope, pressed into the cave wall like someone had pushed it into wet cement. "We need to get out of here," Doc said. His voice was tight with fear. I wanted to agree. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get my team out of this cave. But 3 people were still missing down there. They might be hurt. They might need help. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I was starting to think that whatever had happened to those 3 cavers, we couldn't help them anymore. The sound came again. Much closer. And this time, I could swear it sounded like laughter. Against my better judgment, we went deeper. I know that sounds crazy. Every sign was telling us to get out. The equipment failures, the strange sounds, the rope embedded in stone. But I had 16 years of training telling me not to abandon people in trouble. 3 experienced cavers were somewhere in this cave system, and it was my job to find them. I just didn't know yet what we'd find instead. We took the passage that led to the lowest levels of Hellhole Cave. This was expert territory, narrow crawlways, vertical drops, and underground streams that could trap you if you weren't careful. The tracks in the mud continued down this way, human boots and those enormous other prints side by side. The temperature kept dropping. By the time we'd gone another 100 feet down, it was so cold that our breath froze on our face masks. That shouldn't have been possible. We were now almost 500 feet underground, where the temperature should have been stable. But nothing about this cave was behaving the way it should. Beth was crawling through a narrow section when she stopped suddenly. "There's something up ahead," she whispered back to us. I crawled up beside her and looked. The passage opened into another chamber, bigger than the first one, and there was light down there. Not electric light from helmet lamps, but a strange, dim glow that seemed to come from the rock itself. We emerged into the chamber carefully, ready for anything. What we found was worse than anything I could have imagined. It was full of bones. Not just a few bones scattered around. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were arranged in neat piles along the chamber walls, sorted by type. Arm bones in one pile, leg bones in another, skulls in a third. Some of the bones looked old, yellowed with age. Others looked fresh, and some of them weren't human. Mixed in with the human remains were bones from animals I couldn't identify. Things with claws like swords and teeth like railroad spikes. Creatures that had never walked the surface of the earth. "My God," Doc whispered. "How long has this been going on?" I didn't answer because I was looking at something that made my blood turn to ice. In the fresh skull pile, I could see 3 that looked new, very new. And next to them were 3 sets of cave gear I recognized. We'd found our missing cavers, but they weren't missing anymore. They were part of the collection. Beth was shaking, and Jake had gone pale as death. Doc was staring at the bone piles like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing, and I was trying to figure out how to get my team out of there alive. That's when the stones started moving. It began slowly. Just a few small rocks rolling across the cave floor for no reason. Then larger stones. Then chunks of limestone falling from the ceiling, but not randomly. They fell in patterns, like someone was arranging them. The strange glow was getting brighter. It was coming from the walls themselves, deep inside the limestone. Like there was something behind the rock, trying to get out. And then we heard the voice. Not the grinding, roaring sound from before. This was different. It spoke directly into our minds without using our ears. It spoke in words we could understand, but the voice was like rocks tumbling down a mountainside. Who disturbs the deep places? I've been in dangerous situations before. Cave-ins, flash floods, equipment failures hundreds of feet underground. I know how to stay calm under pressure. But hearing that voice in my head, I nearly lost it completely. Beth grabbed my arm. Did you hear that? We'd all heard it, or felt it, or whatever you call it when something speaks directly into your mind. The stones on the floor were rearranging themselves, forming patterns, symbols. They looked almost like writing, but not in any alphabet I'd ever seen. The symbols seemed to move and shift even as I watched them. Surface DWE come too deep. Surface DWE disturb the guardian. I found my voice somehow. We're looking for 3 people. Cavers who came down here yesterday. Are they alive? The laughter that answered me wasn't heard. It was felt. It shook the entire chamber, and more stones fell from the ceiling. They are part of the deep places now, as you will be. That's when I saw it. It came out of a passage I hadn't noticed before, moving with impossible silence for something so large. At first, it just looked like a shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness. But as it entered the chamber, the strange glow revealed what we were facing. The Cherokee called it Kikle Kudle, stone giant. Looking at it, I understood why. It stood at least 12 feet tall, maybe more. Its body looked like it had been carved from living granite, muscles of stone, joints that moved like flowing rock. Its face was roughly human but enormous, with eyes like pieces of coal that burned with their own dark fire. But it was the hands that terrified me most. Each finger ended in a claw that looked like it had been chiseled from black obsidian. Those claws could tear through rope, could push metal into stone, could arrange bones like a housewife arranging flowers. It looked at us for a long moment, and I felt its attention like a physical weight. Those coal-black eyes seemed to see right through us, to measure us, to decide what we were worth. 16 years you have walked above, never coming too deep, never disturbing what should not be disturbed. It knew me. Somehow, this thing had been watching me for 16 years, watching me work in the caves, rescue people, protect the mountains. And it had let me be, as long as I stayed in the shallow places. But now I'd come too deep. The deep places must be protected. The ancient ways must be kept. Surface dwellers who come too deep must stay. The creature moved closer, and I could feel the cold radiating from its stone skin. Our lights failed completely now, leaving only that strange glow from the walls to see by. Jake tried to run. I don't blame him. Faced with something like that, running seems like the only sane option. But the passages had changed again. The way we'd come in was sealed with stones that hadn't been there before. We were trapped. The stone giant reached out with one massive hand toward Beth. Those obsidian claws were inches from her face. That's when I remembered something an old Cherokee man had told me years ago. Something about respect and offerings and the old ways. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing I had that might work. A small pouch of tobacco that I carried for emergencies. Old habit from my mining days. Wait, I said, stepping between the creature and my team. We didn't come to disturb or steal. We came to help. That's what we do. We help people who are lost in the mountains. The coal-black eyes fixed on me. We respect the deep places, I continued, hoping I was remembering the old man's words correctly. We respect the guardian who protects them. We offer this in respect. I held out the tobacco pouch with shaking hands. The creature stared at me for what felt like hours. Then, slowly, it reached out and took the pouch. Its stone fingers were surprisingly gentle. You remember the old ways. Few surface dwellers remember. The glow from the walls began to fade. The stones that had blocked our exit passage rolled away. Go. Take your people. Do not come to the deep places again. I didn't need to be told twice. We ran. Through passages that twisted and changed around us, past chambers that definitely hadn't been there on the way down, up shafts that seemed to stretch on forever. Behind us, I could hear the sound of stone grinding against stone, like the mountain itself was moving. My team was in shock. Beth kept stumbling, Jake was hyperventilating, and Doc was muttering prayers under his breath. But we were alive, and we were moving toward the surface. The creature, the Kekle Kudla, wasn't chasing us. I could feel its presence somewhere far below, watching us go. But it wasn't following. It had made its point. We were almost to the main shaft when everything went wrong. The mountain started shaking. Not an earthquake. This was different. It felt like something huge was moving deep inside the earth, rearranging the very bones of the mountain. Chunks of limestone fell from the ceiling, and the passage ahead of us suddenly narrowed to half its size. "The whole cave system is collapsing," Jake shouted. But it wasn't collapsing randomly. I could see that now. The passages were being reshaped, reformed. The stone giant was changing the cave, sealing it off from the surface world, making sure that no one else would come too deep. Unfortunately for us, we were still inside when it decided to make those changes. A wall of stone rose up in front of us, blocking our path to the main shaft. Behind us, the passage we'd just come through was sealing itself. We were trapped in a pocket of cave that was shrinking by the minute. "The emergency exit," Beth said. "There's an emergency shaft about 50 feet to the left." She was right. There was a narrow chimney that led up to a secondary entrance. It wasn't on any of the tourist maps, but cavers knew about it. The problem was, it was barely wide enough for one person at a time, and it was a straight vertical climb of over 200 feet. In normal circumstances, it would be difficult but doable. With the mountain reshaping itself around us, it was almost impossible. But it was our only chance. We reached the chimney just as the passage behind us finished sealing itself. The narrow shaft stretched up into darkness, barely 3 feet wide. We'd have to climb without ropes, using just our hands and feet against the limestone walls. Doc went first. He was the oldest and would move the slowest, so we wanted him to get a head start. Jake followed, then Beth. I came last, making sure everyone was moving. The climb was exhausting. Your arms and legs burn when you're chimney climbing, and the confined space makes you feel like you can't breathe. But we kept moving because we could feel the mountain changing around us. The shaft was getting narrower. We were about halfway up when I felt something touch my mind again. That same stone voice, but closer now. More personal. "Marcus Kellerman. Cellarman, you who goes underground." I almost lost my grip on the limestone. The creature was speaking to me directly, while I was clinging to a rock wall 200 feet underground. 16 years you have served the mountains. You understand the balance between surface and deep. I kept climbing, but I could feel its attention on me like a weight. The deep places must remain deep. The surface world must not know what lies below. You will ensure this. Above me, my team was still climbing. They couldn't hear this conversation. It was just between me and the guardian of the deep places. "How?" I gasped out loud. "You will know." And then I felt something change in my forehead. A burning sensation, like someone was carving into my skull with a hot knife. But it was inside my head, not on the surface. I reached up with one hand to touch my forehead and felt a mark there. A raised pattern in my skin that hadn't been there before. It felt like stone. The creature's voice came one last time, already fading as we climbed toward the surface. "Now you are marked. Now you are guardian of the boundary. Keep the surface world away from the deep places. Keep the secret." I understood. The tobacco offering had saved our lives, but it had also bound me to something. I was no longer just a ranger who happened to work in caves. I was something else now. A keeper of the boundary between the surface world and whatever ancient things lived in the deep places. We reached the top of the shaft, just as the sun was setting. We'd been underground for almost 10 hours, though it felt like 10 years. We lay on the ground outside the secondary entrance, breathing the cold mountain air and trying to convince ourselves that we were really alive. When I sat up and looked back at the cave entrance, it was gone. The shaft we'd just climbed out of had sealed itself. There was nothing but solid rock where the opening had been. Beth was staring at me strangely. "Marcus," she said, "your forehead." I touched the mark again. It was still there, raised like a scar, but warm to the touch. "What is it?" she asked. I looked at my team: Beth, Doc, and Jake. All of them traumatized. All of them changed by what we'd experienced. All of them expecting me to explain what had happened, but I knew I couldn't tell them the truth. Not the whole truth. The thing in the deep places had made that clear. Some secrets were too dangerous for the surface world to know. Cave debris, I said, must have hit me during the collapse. It was a lie, but it was a necessary lie. The first of many I would tell over the years, to keep the boundary between the surface and the deep places intact. We filed our report 2 days later. 3 experienced cavers had been killed in a sudden geological collapse in Hellhole Cave. The cave system was declared structurally unstable and permanently closed to the public. The families of the missing cavers received settlement payments from the Park Service. It was all lies, but they were official lies. The kind that get filed away and forgotten. Beth Morrison transferred to a desk job in the main park office the following week. She never went into another cave. When I asked her why, she just touched her head and said, "I still hear the stones moving." Doc Phillips took early retirement and moved to Florida. Jake Sullivan stayed on as a ranger, but requested assignment to the visitor center. Neither of them ever spoke about what happened in Hellhole Cave. As for me, I stayed on. 16 years became 17, then 18, then 20. I'm still working the deep wilderness of the Blue Ridge, but my job has changed. The mark on my forehead never went away. It looks like a scar to most people, a rough circle with lines radiating out from it. Looks like I walked into a tree branch or took a fall on some rocks. But it's not a scar, it's something else. It's a compass. No matter where I am in the mountains, that mark points toward the sealed entrance to Hellhole Cave. I can feel it pulling at me, reminding me of my responsibility. I am the guardian of the boundary now. I keep people away from the deep places. Over the years, I've had to file a lot of reports about geological instability and sudden cave collapses. I've had to convince a lot of experienced cavers that certain cave systems were too dangerous to explore. I've had to lie to families about what happened to their loved ones who went too deep. It's not easy work, but it's necessary work. The thing about the deep places is that they're always there, always waiting. New caves open up sometimes. Old ones that have been sealed for decades suddenly become accessible again, and there are always people who want to explore them, to push deeper, to see what's down there. My job is to make sure they don't. Sometimes I hear things in the quiet moments. Stone grinding against stone, deep underground. The sound of something vast moving in spaces that don't appear on any map. And sometimes, very rarely, I hear that voice again. The voice of the Kekla Kudla, the guardian of the deep places. It doesn't speak in words anymore. It doesn't need to. We understand each other now. I have twin daughters, Emma and Lucy. They're 28 now, both married with children of their own. They bring my grandkids to visit the mountains sometimes, and the little ones love to explore. But they never go into caves. They don't even ask to. Kids can sense things that adults have forgotten how to see. They know, instinctively, that some places are meant to be left alone. I'm 57 now. In a few years, I'll retire from the Park Service. When that time comes, I'll need to find someone else to take my place. Someone who understands the responsibility. Someone who can keep the boundary intact. Because the deep places are still there. They're always there. And sometimes, when the fog rolls thick through the valleys and the temperature drops just a little too fast, I can feel them calling. Calling to anyone foolish enough to go too deep. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, stick to the marked trails. Don't explore caves that aren't on the official park maps. And if you hear stones grinding together in the darkness below, turn around and walk away. Some doors should never be opened. Some places should never be disturbed. And some secrets should stay buried in the deep places where they belong. Trust me on this. I'm the one who keeps watch. My name is Marcus Kellerman, and I guard the boundary between the world you know and the world you pray you'll never see. The mountains are beautiful, but they keep their own secrets, and I help them keep those secrets safe. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger at Seneca Rocks for 12 years now. People always ask me why I chose this job, working with families and kids in the wilderness. The truth is, I used to be a pediatric nurse before this. I was good at it too, until the day I lost my own little girl in a car accident. After that, I couldn't stand being around sick children anymore. But healthy, happy kids running around the mountains, that felt like healing. Seneca Rocks sits in West Virginia's North Fork Valley, where these massive sandstone cliffs shoot up from the earth like giant fingers reaching for the sky. The rocks are almost 900 feet tall, and when the morning mist rolls through, they look like something from a fairy tale. Families come here every summer to camp, hike, and watch their kids explore nature for the first time. I specialize in family camping, safety, and child emergency response. After what happened to my daughter, I made it my mission to make sure no other parent would lose their child on my watch. I know every trail, every cliff edge, every place a curious kid might wander off and get into trouble. The summer of 1971 was different, though. We'd been having this terrible heat wave for weeks, with the kind of sticky humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on everything. Even the animals seemed nervous. Birds would stop singing suddenly, and I'd see deer standing perfectly still, like they were listening for something I couldn't hear. What most visitors don't know is that these mountains are full of old mine shafts from the 1800s. Back then, they were digging for coal and lead, and safety wasn't exactly a priority. In 1847, there was a terrible accident at the Seneca mine. A section collapsed during a storm, trapping 23 children who were working inside. They never found the bodies. The mine was sealed up, and people tried to forget about it. But kids have always been drawn to those old mine entrances. There's something about dark, mysterious holes in the ground that makes children want to explore, no matter how many times you tell them it's dangerous. That weekend in late August, we had 4 families camping in our busiest section. The Millers had 2 kids, 8-year-old Tommy and his little sister Sarah, who was 6. The Hendersons brought their quiet 10-year-old son David, and the Clarks had 9-year-old Amy, a bright girl who loved to ask questions about everything. Friday evening, everything seemed normal. Kids were roasting marshmallows, parents were relaxing after setting up their tents, and I was making my usual rounds to check on everyone. But I noticed something odd. Several parents mentioned that their children had been talking about making new friends, kids they'd met earlier that day. Tommy keeps going on about these children who know all the best hiding spots. Mrs. Miller told me with a laugh. Says they're teaching him games I've never heard of. Mrs. Henderson said something similar about David, and so did the Clarks about Amy. When I asked where these other children were camping, the parents looked confused. "We haven't seen any other kids around here, mister," Clark said, scratching his head. "Amy insists they're real, but we figured she just has a good imagination." I made a mental note to keep an eye out for families I might have missed during check-in, but something about it bothered me. In 12 years, I'd never lost track of who was staying where. That night, I couldn't sleep. The heat was suffocating, and there was this strange stillness in the air. No insects chirping, no wind rustling the leaves. Just silence that felt too deep, too empty. Around midnight, I thought I heard something that made my blood run cold. Children laughing. It was faint, echoing from somewhere far away, but it definitely sounded like kids playing. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the noise, but the laughter seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. When I reached the area where it seemed loudest, I was standing near one of the old mine markers, a rusted sign that read, "Danger. Abandoned mine shaft. Keep out." The laughing stopped as soon as I got there. Saturday morning started like any other summer day, except for one thing: it was too quiet. Usually by 7 a.m., you'd hear kids running around, parents making breakfast, the normal sounds of a campground waking up. Instead, there was just silence. I was making my morning coffee when Mrs. Miller came running to my station, still in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor, I can't find Tommy and Sarah. They're not in their tent. They're not anywhere." My training kicked in immediately. "When did you last see them?" "Last night at bedtime, around 9. They were whispering and giggling about playing with their new friends today, but I told them to go to sleep." She was shaking. "I just checked on them now and their sleeping bags are empty." "They're gone!" Before I could respond, Mr. Henderson came jogging over, looking panicked. "Have you seen David? He's not in his tent either." My stomach dropped. "What about the Clarks?" We all looked toward their campsite at the same time, and Mrs. Clark came running toward us, calling Amy's name. 4 children, gone without a trace. I immediately called for backup and started following protocol. We searched every tent, every trail, every obvious place kids might wander. I called the children's names until my voice was hoarse, but there was no response. It was like they had vanished into thin air. The weird thing was, there were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from the campsite, nothing disturbed. Their sleeping bags were just empty, like the kids had simply evaporated. By noon, we had search teams combing the entire area. Police dogs, Forest Service rangers, volunteers, force ever. Everyone looking for 4 missing children. The parents were beside themselves, and I was starting to feel that familiar panic I remembered from the day I lost my own daughter. That's when Tom Ashford, another ranger who'd been working these mountains longer than anyone, pulled me aside. "Eleanor, you need to see something," he said quietly. He led me to a spot about 50 yards from the main campsite, near a cluster of tall rocks. "Look at this." In the soft dirt near the base of the rocks, there were dozens of small handprints. But they weren't normal handprints. They were too pale, like they'd been made with chalk or flour instead of skin. And they led directly toward a rock face that should have been solid stone. "That's impossible," I whispered. "There's no opening there." Tom nodded grimly. "That's what I thought too. But look closer." I knelt down and examined the rock wall. At first, it looked completely solid. But when I moved my flashlight at just the right angle, I could see the faintest outline of an opening, like a crack barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through. "How long has this been here?" I asked. "As far as I know, never. I've been past this spot 1,000 times." Tom's voice was shaky. "Eleanor, these handprints, they're not just leading to the rock. They're coming from inside it too." I felt a chill run down my spine despite the heat. We called to the search teams and pointed out our discovery. But when the lead officer came over with his flashlight, he couldn't see the opening at all. "You two need some water and rest," he said dismissively. "Heat exhaustion can cause hallucinations." But Tom and I knew what we'd seen. And as the day wore on, things got stranger. Around 3 in the afternoon, Mrs. Miller suddenly perked up during the search. "Do you hear that?" she asked. We all stopped and listened. Faintly, carried on the breeze, we could hear children's voices. Not calling for help, but playing. Singing songs and giggling, like they were having the time of their lives. The voices seemed to come from inside the rocks themselves. "Tommy, Sarah," Mrs. Miller screamed toward the cliff face. "Mommy's here, come back." For just a moment, the children's voices got louder, and I swear I heard Tommy's voice call back. "We're playing with our new friends. They know the best games." Then silence. The police officer who had dismissed our discovery earlier now looked concerned. "Where exactly are those voices coming from?" I led him to the same spot where Tom and I had found the handprints, but now there was no trace of them. The dirt was smooth, undisturbed. And the crack in the rock? Gone. The wall was completely solid stone. But I could still hear the children laughing, somewhere far beneath our feet. As the sun started to set, the search teams decided to expand their grid and continue through the night. Parents were setting up a camp at the ranger station, refusing to leave without their children. I stayed with them, but my mind kept going back to those pale handprints and the impossible crack in the rock. That night, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I snuck back to the spot with my strongest flashlight and camping gear. If there was even a chance those children were somewhere in the rocks, I had to find them. The moment I approached the cliff face alone, the crack reappeared. Clear as day, just wide enough for a small person to squeeze through. I could feel cool air coming from inside, carrying the faint sound of children's voices. "Hello?" I called softly. "Tommy? Sarah? David? Amy?" The voices stopped. Then, slowly, I heard footsteps coming toward me from deep inside the rock. Small footsteps, like children walking on stone. But what stepped out of that impossible crack wasn't the missing children. It was a boy about 10 years old, wearing clothes from another time, rough brown pants, a cotton shirt, and suspenders. His skin was pale as moonlight, and his eyes were completely black. When he smiled at me, his teeth looked like they were made of stone. "Are you here to play too?" he asked in a voice that echoed like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking in my hands. The boy didn't seem real, like I was looking at him through water or fog. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I'm Samuel," he said, tilting his head. We've been waiting so long for new friends. The others are inside, playing our games. Would you like to join them?" Behind him, I could see other children emerging from the crack in the rock. All pale, all wearing old-fashioned clothes, all with those terrible black eyes. And mixed in with them, I saw Tommy, Sarah, David, and Amy. But something was wrong with them too. Their skin was starting to look pale, and their eyes were becoming darker. "Let them go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Their parents are looking for them." Samuel's smile faded. "But we're so lonely. We've been alone in the dark for so long. They're our friends now. They want to stay and play with us forever." That's when I understood what I was dealing with. These weren't living children. These were the spirits of the kids who died in the mine collapse over 100 years ago. And somehow, they were turning the missing children into spirits just like them. I stood there facing Samuel and his ghostly companions, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The missing children were right there, but they looked different. Tommy and Sarah were holding hands with two pale children I didn't recognize. David was standing behind a girl in an old-fashioned dress. Amy was braiding the hair of another spirit child, humming softly. "You have to let them come home," I said, trying to use the calm voice I'd learned from my nursing days. "Their families love them. They're worried sick." Samuel's black eyes seemed to get even darker. "Families leave. Families forget. We had families too, once. But they sealed us in the dark and tried to pretend we never existed." The other spirit children moved closer, forming a circle around the living children. I noticed that Tommy and Sarah's skin was definitely paler than it had been, and their movements seemed slower, like they were moving underwater. "How long have the children been with you?" I asked. "Time is different here," said a girl spirit wearing a tattered mining helmet. "We've been playing for days, or maybe years. They're almost ready to stay with us forever." My blood went cold. Whatever was happening to the missing children, it was getting worse the longer they stayed with these spirits. I had to get them out, but I also knew that if I tried to grab them and run, the spirits might do something terrible. "Samuel," I said, kneeling down to be at his eye level. "I understand why you're lonely. You've been trapped here for over 100 years. That must be so hard." He nodded, and for a moment, his terrifying black eyes looked almost human. "The mountain fell on us while we were working. We called for help, but no one came. We waited and waited until we forgot what it felt like to be warm, to be real. But taking these children won't fix your loneliness," I continued carefully. "It will just make more families feel the same pain yours felt when they lost you." Samuel's face twisted with anger. "These children want to stay. Tell her," he commanded, turning to Amy. Amy looked at me with eyes that were now more gray than brown. When she spoke, her voice sounded hollow and distant. "We're having fun, Miss Eleanor. The games here are so much better than the boring games up there. We never get tired, and we never have to go to bed." But I caught something in her voice, a tiny tremor of fear or confusion. These children weren't making this choice freely. The spirits were doing something to their minds, making them forget their real lives. "Amy, do you remember your parents? Do you remember camping with your mom and dad?" She blinked slowly, and for just a second, her eyes cleared. "Mommy? Where's my mommy?" Samuel hissed and waved his hand, and Amy's eyes went gray again. "We don't need mommies and daddies here. We have each other." That's when I realized I was running out of time. The longer these children stayed with the spirits, the more they would forget about their real lives. Soon, they would become spirits themselves, trapped forever in this nightmare place. "I want to see where they're playing," I said suddenly. "If it's so wonderful, maybe I can understand why they want to stay." Samuel looked suspicious, but also pleased. "You want to come into our home?" "Just for a little while," I lied. "To see what makes it so special." He smiled his terrible stone-toothed smile and gestured toward the crack in the rock. "Follow us. But be warned, adults don't usually like our games as much as children do." I squeezed through the opening in the rock, my flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead. The space beyond was impossible, a vast underground cavern that should not have existed inside a solid cliff face. The walls were covered with old mining equipment, rusted pickaxes and broken lanterns. But the strangest part was the sound. Children playing, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. I could hear tag games and jump rope songs, hide-and-seek counting, all echoing through the tunnels that branched off from the main cavern. But when I shined my light toward the sounds, I never saw anyone playing. "Where are all the other children?" I asked. "Everywhere," Samuel said happily. "Some have been here since the mountain fell. Some joined us later, when they wandered too close to our doors. We have children from many different times now." The idea that there had been other missing children over the years made me sick. How many families had lost their kids to these spirits? How many children were trapped down here? As we walked deeper into the cavern, I started to see them. Dozens of pale children in clothes from different eras. Some wore mining clothes like Samuel. Others had on clothes from the early 1900s, the 1922, the 1940s. All of them had the same black eyes and stone-pale skin, and scattered among them were children in modern clothes. Recent additions to this ghostly family. "You've been taking children for over a century," I whispered in horror. "We only take the lonely ones," said the girl with the mining helmet. "The ones who feel forgotten or sad. We can sense them from far away." That's when I understood why Tommy, Sarah, David, and Amy had been chosen. I remembered the parents saying their kids had been talking about feeling left out at school, or fighting with siblings, or struggling to make friends. The spirits had sensed their loneliness and used it to lure them here. "But they're not really lonely," I said. "They have families who love them. They just needed someone to listen to their problems and help them work through them." Samuel's face darkened. "Love isn't enough. Love didn't save us when the mountain fell. Love didn't bring us back to life." The spirit children started moving closer, and I realized I was in serious danger. The temperature in the cavern was dropping rapidly, and I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight. The walls seemed to be closing in, and the playful sounds of children were becoming more sinister. Laughter that was too sharp, singing that was too fast. "You're going to stay with us too, aren't you?" Samuel asked, but it didn't sound like a question anymore. It sounded like a threat. That's when I saw them, huddled together in an alcove. Tommy, Sarah, David, and Amy. They were sitting in a circle with several spirit children, playing some kind of hand-clapping game, but their movements were slow and jerky, like puppets being controlled by invisible strings. Their skin was almost translucent now, and I could see dark veins spreading under the surface. They were dying. Or worse, they were becoming like the spirits, trapped forever between life and death. "Let me play with them," I said quickly. "If their games are so wonderful, I want to learn them too." Samuel nodded and led me to the circle. As I sat down between Tommy and Amy, I could feel the cold radiating from their small bodies. When Tommy looked at me, his eyes were completely black. "Miss Eleanor," he said in that hollow, echoing voice, "we're learning the best games. This one is called Remember the Light." The spirit children started clapping in a complex rhythm, and Tommy, Sarah, David, and Amy joined in. As they clapped, I could see flashes of memory in their eyes. The brief moments where they remembered their real lives. A birthday party, Christmas morning, playing in their backyards. But each memory was flickering and fading, like candles being blown out one by one. I realized this wasn't just a game. It was how the spirits were stealing the children's memories, erasing their connections to the living world so they could never find their way back. "Stop!" I shouted, grabbing Tommy's hands to break the rhythm. "You have to remember who you are. Remember your mom and dad. Remember your real home." The spirit children hissed and moved toward me, their black eyes blazing with anger. Samuel's voice boomed through the cavern. "You're trying to take our friends away. That's not fair. And you're trying to take these children away from their families forever," I shot back. "That's not fair either." The spirits surrounded us, and I knew I had only seconds before they did something terrible. I had to think like a child psychologist, not a frightened adult. These spirits weren't evil. They were traumatized children who had been alone and scared for over a century. They didn't understand the difference between sharing friendship and stealing lives. "Samuel," I said, still holding Tommy's hands tight, "what if there was a way for you to have friends without taking them away from their families forever?" Samuel tilted his head, and the other spirits stopped moving toward me. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to suggest would change my life forever. But looking at Tommy, Sarah, David, and Amy, seeing how pale and empty their eyes were becoming, I knew I had to try something desperate. What if I promised to bring children to visit you? Real children who could play with you and keep you company, but who would always go home to their families at the end. The spirits looked confused. Visit? Asked the girl with the mining helmet. Yes, like having friends come over to play, but they don't spend the night. They come for a few hours, play games, tell stories, and then they go home for dinner with their parents. Samuel's black eyes seemed to flicker with something almost like hope. But they would come back? If they wanted to, yes. And if I could find children who were lonely and needed friends, maybe they would want to come back a lot. I was making this up as I went along, but I could see that the idea was appealing to them. These spirits had been isolated for so long that they didn't understand the difference between friendship and imprisonment. There are a lot of children who feel lonely, I continued, thinking about all the kids I'd met in my years as a ranger and a nurse. Children who have trouble making friends at school, or who feel different from other kids. They might really enjoy having special friends who understand what it's like to feel alone. Samuel looked around at the other spirits, and I could see them having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, he turned back to me. But what if they decide they don't want to visit us anymore? What if they forget about us like everyone else did? Then you let them go, and I'll help you find new friends. There will always be lonely children who need someone to play with, but the important thing is that they have to choose to be your friends. You can't take that choice away from them. The spirits murmured among themselves, and I could feel Tommy's hands getting warmer in mine. His eyes were still black, but they seemed less empty than before. And you? Samuel asked. Would you visit us too? I thought about my own loneliness, the grief I'd been carrying for years since losing my daughter. In a strange way, I understood these spirits better than they knew. Yes, I said softly. I would visit you too. I know what it's like to lose someone you love. I know what it's like to feel alone. Samuel's stone-pale face softened slightly. You lost a child. I did. A little girl about your age. And I've been lonely ever since. Is that why you take care of the children who come to the mountain? I nodded, surprised by how perceptive he was. Yes. Helping other children feel safe helps me remember what it was like to love my daughter. Samuel looked at Tommy, Sarah, David, and Amy, then back at me. If we let them go back to their families, will you really bring us new friends? I promise, I said. But you have to understand, these children aren't your property. They're people with their own lives and feelings. If you want to be their friends, you have to respect that. The spirit boy was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the whispers of dozens of other spirits throughout the cavern. Finally, Samuel nodded. We accept your bargain. But if you break your promise, I won't, I said firmly. I give you my word, as someone who understands loss. Samuel waved his hand, and suddenly the 4 missing children gasped like they were coming up from underwater. The black drained from their eyes, their skin started to look normal again, and they looked around in confusion. Miss Eleanor? Amy said in her normal voice. Where are we? I was having the strangest dream. You're safe, I told them. We're going to go home now. But as I helped the children stand up, Samuel grabbed my arm with his cold, pale hand. Remember your promise, he whispered. We'll be waiting. The walk back through the cavern felt like it took hours, but finally we emerged from the crack in the rock. The moment we stepped into the cool night air, the children seemed to fully wake up from whatever spell they'd been under. Mommy, Sarah cried, and I looked up to see the search team still combing the area with flashlights. The parents had never stopped looking. The reunion was everything I'd hoped for, tears, hugs, and relief beyond words. But when the parents asked where the children had been, I found myself giving a carefully edited version of the truth. They wandered into an old mine shaft, I said. They got turned around in the tunnels and couldn't find their way out. It took us this long to track them down and bring them back safely. The children seemed confused by this explanation, but their memories of the spirit world were already fading like a strange dream. Within a few hours, they would probably convince themselves that's exactly what had happened. But I would remember everything, and I would keep my promise. That was 30 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live in the valley near Seneca Rocks. And every month, I keep my promise to Samuel and the other spirits. It started small. I began volunteering with children who were struggling. Kids in foster care, kids with disabilities, kids who had trouble making friends at school. I would bring them to the mountains for special camping trips, and we would visit the spirits. The children always thought it was just their imagination at first, but the spirits were gentle with these living children, playing games and telling stories, never trying to trap them or steal their life force. And the lonely kids loved having friends who understood what it was like to feel different or forgotten. Over the years, I've brought dozens of children to visit the spirits. Some came once and never wanted to return. Others became regular visitors, growing up with their ghostly friends and eventually bringing their own children to meet them. The spirits have kept their part of the bargain too. There have been no more unexplained disappearances around Seneca Rocks. No more children vanishing without a trace. But sometimes, late at night when I'm walking near the old mine sites, I still hear them playing. Children's laughter echoing from beneath the stone, games of tag in tunnels that shouldn't exist, and Samuel's voice calling out, "Thank you for remembering us." I had a memorial built at the site where the original mining accident happened. 23 small headstones with the names of the children who died in 1847, and a plaque that reads, "In memory of the young lives lost to the mountain, they are not forgotten." People visit that memorial now. Families bring flowers, and sometimes I see children sitting by the headstones, talking quietly to spirits only they can see. I always watch from a distance, making sure both the living and the dead are safe. The truth is, I understand Samuel and his friends better now than I did that night in the cavern. We're all looking for connection, for someone who remembers we existed, for proof that our lives mattered. The spirits found that connection in the wrong way at first, but now they've learned a better way. And I found my own peace too. Taking care of lonely children, both living and dead, has helped heal the hole in my heart left by my daughter's death. She would have been about Samuel's age if she had lived. Sometimes I think that's why I was the one who could talk to him, because I understood what tweenine it meant to be a child lost too soon. If you ever find yourself camping near old mining areas, especially if you have children with you, listen for the sound of kids playing where no children should be. Don't be afraid, they're just lonely and looking for friends. But remember what I learned that summer night 30 years ago. True friendship can't be forced or stolen. It has to be freely given. And if you ever see a pale child with black eyes watching from the shadows, don't run away. Just remember that they were someone's son or daughter once, and they've been alone in the dark for far too long. Some promises are worth keeping forever, even the ones we make to ghosts. Asterisk, end of story. 4,847 words, asterisk. Asterisk. Eleanor Whitmore retired from the National Park Service in 1989 but continues to work with at-risk children in West Virginia. The Seneca Mining Memorial receives over 10,000 visitors each year. No children have gone missing in the Seneca Rocks area since 1971. Asterisk. My name is Robert Kinsman, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 22 years now, and in all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Car wrecks, heart attacks, hypothermia cases, folks who got too close to the edge and paid for it. Death was part of the job, same as checking permits and maintaining trails. I was wrong about having seen everything. November 15th, 1989, started like any other late autumn day on Devil's Backbone Ridge. The Weather Service had been screaming about an ice storm coming in, and we'd already closed the parkway through traffic. Smart folks had headed home. The stubborn ones were about to learn why we call this stretch of road the Devil's Backbone. I was finishing my rounds at the Rough Ridge Overlook when the radio crackled. Unit 7, we've got a report of an injured hiker up on Devil's Backbone Trail. Anonymous caller said someone's hurt bad up there. I grabbed the handset. This is Bobby. You sure about that location? Trail's been closed since yesterday. That's what dispatch says. Caller hung up before we could get details. I looked out at the ridgeline through my truck's windshield. The granite cliffs rose like broken teeth against gray sky, already glazed with ice. Fog rolled between the peaks, like smoke from some giant's campfire. In weather like this, Devil's Backbone became a death trap. One wrong step and you'd fall 300 feet onto the rocks below. But if someone was hurt up there, they wouldn't last long. The temperature was dropping fast, and the freezing rain had started again, tapping against my windshield like bony fingers. I'd been a medic in Vietnam before this job. saw plenty of young men die in places they never should have been. That's what drew me to wilderness medicine, using those same skills to save lives instead of just watching them slip away. 22 years of emergency responses had taught me that time was everything. Every minute you waited was a minute closer to losing someone. I radioed back to confirm I was responding, then started loading my pack. Medical supplies, rope, emergency shelter, flares, the works. If someone was hurt on Devil's Backbone, it would take everything I had to get them out alive. The trail started easy enough, wide, well-marked path through bare hardwoods. But as I climbed higher, the ice got thicker. My boots crunched through a skin of ice with each step, and I had to use my hiking poles just to stay upright. The fog was getting denser too, cutting visibility down to maybe 30 feet. That's when I first heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever encountered in these mountains. Low, rumbling, almost like a growl but deeper. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the cliff faces until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. I stopped, listening. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no wind through the branches. Even the freezing rain seemed muffled. In 22 years of walking these trails, I'd never experienced quiet like that. It wasn't natural. The growling came again, closer this time. My hand went to the radio clipped to my belt, but something stopped me from calling it in. What would I say? That I heard a scary noise? Rangers were supposed to be made of tougher stuff. I kept climbing. The trail switchbacked up through a grove of twisted mountain laurel, their branches heavy with ice. In summer, this section bloomed white and pink, beautiful as a wedding cake. Now it looked like a crystal graveyard, every branch and twig encased in ice that clicked and chimed in the wind. That's where I found the first sign that something was wrong. Footprints in the thin snow, but not human ones. They were huge, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen, with claw marks gouging deep into the earth. The prints were fresh, too, steam still rising from them in the cold air. Whatever made them had passed this way maybe 10 minutes ago. I knelt down to get a better look. The prints were easily 6 inches across, with 4 distinct toe pads and claw marks that extended another 2 inches beyond that. But here's what made my skin crawl. They were spaced too far apart. Whatever was walking on 4 legs had to be the size of a small horse. I've seen black bear tracks, mountain lion tracks, even the occasional coyote. This wasn't any of those. This was something else entirely. The growling came again, much closer now. Close enough that I could feel it in my chest, a low vibration that made my teeth ache. I looked around, trying to spot whatever was making the sound, but the fog had thickened until I could barely see the trail markers. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The footprints weren't just animal tracks. They were following the trail, following it upward toward Devil's Backbone Ridge, exactly where I was heading. I followed those massive tracks for another half-mile, my unease growing with every step. The prints stayed on the trail like whatever made them knew exactly where it was going. Every few hundred yards, I'd find places where the creature had stopped, claw marks gouged into tree bark, or patches of ground torn up like it had been digging. The fog kept getting thicker. By the time I reached the first overlook, I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the steady drip of melting ice and the occasional crack of a branch giving way under the weight. That's when I heard the screaming. Human screaming, high-pitched and desperate, coming from somewhere up ahead. All thoughts of mysterious tracks vanished. Someone was in serious trouble. I dropped my pack and grabbed my medical kit, then started running up the trail as fast as the icy conditions would allow. The screaming came again, closer now, followed by words I could almost make out. It sounded like a man's voice. Young, maybe early 20s. Help! Oh God, somebody help me! I found him at Devil's Backbone Overlook, the most dangerous spot on the entire trail. The kid, he couldn't have been more than 25, was clinging to the edge of the granite cliff, his legs dangling over 300 feet of empty air. His hiking boots had found purchase on a narrow ledge about 6 feet down, but it was crumbling under his weight. Hold on, I called out, dropping to my belly and army crawling to the edge. Don't move, I'm coming. The kid looked up at me with wild, terrified eyes. I can't hold on much longer. The rocks are breaking. I could see what had happened. The overlook had a guardrail, but someone had broken through it. or something had broken through it. The metal posts were bent outward like they'd been hit by a truck, and chunks of granite lay scattered around the opening. But that wasn't what made my hands shake as I rigged up my climbing rope. What made my hands shake were the claw marks. Deep gouges in the granite, 4 parallel lines, each as thick as my thumb. They started at the broken guardrail and ran right to the edge of the cliff, like something massive had dragged the kid to the brink. I got my rope anchored to a solid pine tree and rappelled down to him. The kid's name was Marcus, a college student from Asheville who'd driven up to take photos of the ice storm. He kept babbling about what had happened, but his story didn't make sense. "It came out of the fog," he said as I got a harness around him. "Biggest dog I ever saw, but it wasn't a dog. Eyes like headlights, red as brake lights. It looked right at me and I knew it was going to kill me." "Easy," I said, checking his grip on the rope. "Just a black bear, probably. Fog plays tricks on you up here." But even as I said it, I was thinking about those claw marks in the granite. Bear claws couldn't cut stone like that. Nothing could. We got him up over the edge, and I did a quick medical check. Scraped hands, mild hypothermia, scared half to death, but basically okay. The smart thing would have been to get him off the mountain immediately, call for a helicopter evacuation. Instead, I made the mistake of asking about the dog. "Tell me exactly what you saw," I said as I wrapped him in my emergency blanket. Marcus shivered, but not from cold. "I was taking pictures by the guardrail when the fog rolled in thick. Couldn't see anything, so I started packing up my camera. That's when I heard it breathing. Breathing? Like a steam engine, real deep and loud. I turned around and it was just standing there, maybe 10 feet away. Had to be 6 feet long, black as coal, but the worst part was its eyes. They glowed red, and when it looked at me, I felt like it was looking right through me, like it knew when I was going to die. The kid was shaking now, and not from the cold. It started walking toward me, real slow, like it had all the time in the world. I backed up against the guardrail, but it kept coming. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. "What?" It smiled, pulled back its lips and showed me teeth like railroad spikes, and it smiled like it knew a secret I didn't want to hear. I felt ice forming in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Then what happened? I don't remember exactly. Everything went black for a second, like I passed out standing up. When I came to, I was hanging off the cliff, and the guardrail was smashed. But I could hear it up there, walking around, sniffing the air like it was tracking something. Marcus grabbed my arm with hands that felt like ice. "Mr. Kinsman, that thing wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to make me kill myself, and I think it's still up there." As if summoned by his words, that deep growling echoed through the fog around us. Closer than before. Much closer. I helped Marcus to his feet and started leading him back down the trail, but every instinct I'd developed in 22 years of wilderness work was screaming danger. Whatever was up there in the fog, it wasn't done with us. The tracks proved it. Fresh prints in the mud beside the trail, following us down the mountain, stalking us. I radioed for emergency evacuation, but the response crackled with static. Negative on helicopter. Weather conditions. Ground evacuation only. We were on our own, being hunted by something that shouldn't exist, with no way off the mountain except on foot. And the fog was getting thicker. The descent should have been simple. Follow the trail markers, get Marcus to my truck, drive him to safety. But nothing about that day was going according to plan. The fog had become so thick we could barely see our own feet. I had to use my flashlight just to find the trail markers, and even then we moved at a crawl. Marcus stayed close behind me, jumping at every sound. I couldn't blame him. Those massive footprints kept appearing beside the trail, sometimes on it, always following us down. We were maybe halfway to the parking area when we met Janet and Tom Weatherby. They were day hikers from Virginia, a couple in their 50s who'd been caught by the storm and were trying to find their way out. I found them huddled under a rock overhang, hypothermic and disoriented. "Thank God you're here," Janet said when my flashlight beam found them. "We've been hearing the strangest things. Sounds like something huge, moving around in the fog." Tom nodded, his lips blue with cold. "Growling too. Never heard anything like it." I got them both wrapped in emergency blankets and shared what little hot coffee I had in my thermos. Basic wilderness first aid. Treat the hypothermia. Keep them moving. Get them to warmth and safety. "How long have you been stuck here?" I asked. About an hour, Tom said. We were heading down when the fog got so thick we couldn't see the trail. Then we started hearing things. What kind of things? Janet and Tom exchanged looks. It's going to sound crazy, Janet said finally. Try me. We heard a dog howling, but it sounded wrong. Too deep, too loud. Then we heard it moving through the bushes, circling us. We never saw it, but we could hear branches breaking, like something really big was pushing through. My stomach dropped. When was this? Maybe 20 minutes ago, right before you showed up. I helped them to their feet, trying to keep my voice calm. We need to move, all of us, together. Stay close and don't wander off the trail for any reason. We formed a line, me in front with the flashlight, then Marcus, then the weather buys. I kept one hand on my radio and the other on the flashlight, sweeping the beam back and forth across the trail ahead. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The tracks had changed. Instead of following us, they'd moved ahead. The massive paw prints led down the trail in front of us, like whatever was making them had circled around to cut off our escape route. I was trying to figure out how to handle this when Marcus grabbed my shoulder. Mr. Kinsman, he whispered, look. I followed his pointing finger into the fog to our left. 2 red lights glowed in the darkness, maybe chest high, about 30 feet off the trail. They weren't moving, just watching us. What is that? Janet asked. Before I could answer, the lights blinked. Once, slow and deliberate, like a massive eyelid closing and opening. Nobody move, I whispered. The red lights began to move, circling us just outside the range of my flashlight. I could hear it now, the sound of something huge moving through the underbrush, breaking branches, disturbing the ice-covered leaves. But it moved, silent as smoke, like it weighed nothing at all. Then Tom Weatherby made a mistake that cost him his life. He stepped off the trail. It happened so fast I almost missed it. 1 second he was right behind his wife. The next he was stumbling sideways into the fog, like something had called to him. Janet lunged for his hand, but he was already too far away. Tom, she screamed. I swung my flashlight toward where he'd gone, but the beam just disappeared into the gray wall of fog. No sign of him anywhere. Tom, answer me, Janet called out. We heard him respond, but his voice sounded strange, flat, emotionless. I'm fine, just got turned around. Keep going, I'll catch up. Janet started to follow his voice, but I grabbed her arm. That's not your husband, I said. What do you mean? Of course it's Tom. But I'd heard that tone before, in Vietnam. It was the voice of a man who'd given up, who'd decided he was already dead. I'd heard it from soldiers who walked into enemy fire without caring if they lived or died. Tom, I called out. Follow my voice. Come back to the trail. No answer. Then we heard the scream. It started human and ended as something else entirely. A sound of pure terror that cut through the fog like a knife, echoing off the cliff faces until it became an inhuman wail that seemed to go on forever. Janet collapsed. Marcus vomited. I stood there with my flashlight shaking in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. When the screaming finally stopped, the silence that followed was worse than any sound. Complete, absolute quiet, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. We have to find him, Janet whispered. No, I said. We have to get out of here, right now. I helped her to her feet and got our little group moving again. But I could feel it out there, watching us, following us, playing with us. Because that's what it was doing, playing. If it had wanted to kill us all, it could have. Instead, it had taken Tom, and now it was hurting the rest of us like sheep. The question was, where was it hurting us to? I got my answer when we reached the place where the trail split. The main path led down to the parking area and safety. The other fork led up to Devil's Backbone Ridge and the old Civil War battlefield. Fresh claw marks had been gouged into the trail sign, obliterating the arrow that pointed towards safety. Only one path remained clear, the one leading up, into the darkness where that thing was waiting for us. I stood at that torn-up trail sign, playing my flashlight beam over the destroyed metal, and made a decision that probably saved our lives. Instead of following where that thing wanted us to go, I took us off trail entirely. We're going cross-country, I told Marcus and Janet, straight down through the woods to the parking area. Is that safe? Marcus asked. Safer than going where it wants us to go. We pushed through the underbrush, breaking trail through ice-covered rhododendron and mountain laurel. It was slow going, but at least we were heading toward my truck instead of deeper into whatever trap that creature had set for us. That's when I learned the thing was smarter than I'd given it credit for. We'd been bushwhacking for maybe 10 minutes when I heard Janet gasp behind me. I turned to see her staring at something in the fog ahead. A red glow, like brake lights through the mist. "It's just my truck," I said, relief flooding through me. We made it. But as we got closer, I realized something was wrong. The red glow was too high off the ground, too bright, and it was moving, swaying back and forth like lanterns hanging from a tree. That's when I understood what I was really looking at. Eyes, massive red eyes, level with my chest, watching us approach. The creature stepped out of the fog, and for the first time I got a good look at what we were dealing with. It was huge, 6 feet long and nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, black as midnight, with fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its head was wolf-like but massive, with a mouthful of teeth like broken glass. But the eyes were the worst part. They glowed red as hot coals, and when they looked at you, you felt like they were seeing right through to your soul. "My God," Janet whispered. "What is it?" The creature's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, showing those terrible teeth. When it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder. "I am the shepherd of the dead," it said, "the guardian of the final door. I have walked these ridges since the blood soaked the ground at Devil's Backbone." Marcus grabbed my arm. "It can talk?" "Men call me many names," the creature continued. "Hellhound, Black Shuck, the Grim. But I am simply what I have always been, the Herald of Death." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What do you want?" Those red eyes fixed on me. "I want nothing. I simply am. Where death gathers, I appear. Where blood spills, I feed. This place has known much death, Ranger kinsman. First the Cherokee, driven from their burial grounds. Then the soldiers, blue and gray, dying by the hundreds on these very rocks. Their blood soaked into the stone, and their dying screams echoed through these valleys. The temperature around us seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I was drawn here by that feast of death, and I have remained. For more than a century, I have walked these trails, marking those whose time has come. Some die by accident, a slip on icy rocks, a fall from the overlook. Others I help along when their fear calls to me. "Tom," Janet said. "What did you do to Tom?" The creature's head turned toward her. "Thomas Weatherby died as he was meant to die. I simply showed him the path to his destiny, as I will show you." That's when I understood. This thing didn't just kill people. It fed on death itself. It could sense when someone was close to dying, and it could push them over the edge. That's why it had isolated us up here, cut off our escape routes, filled us with terror. Fear made people make mistakes. Mistakes led to accidents. Accidents led to death. And death fed the creature. "You're wrong about one thing," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The red eyes focused on me. "What is that, Ranger?" "You said you mark those whose time has come, but our time hasn't come, not today." The creature's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "I can smell the death on all of you. The woman's heart pounds too fast. It will stop before dawn. The young man's mind breaks under the weight of what he has seen. He will walk off the cliff willingly. And you carry old death in your bones, soldier. War death. You have been dying slowly for 20 years. It was right, and we all knew it." Janet was hyperventilating, her face gray with shock. Marcus was barely holding it together, his eyes darting around like he expected to see Tom's ghost materialize. And me? I'd been fighting the war in my head for 2 decades, seeing dead soldiers in every shadow. But there was one thing the creature didn't understand about Rangers. About soldiers, about people who've chosen to put their lives on the line for others. Sometimes we don't fight to live. Sometimes we fight just to make sure others can. I pulled the flare gun from my belt and fired it straight into those glowing red eyes. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and stumbled backward. The magnesium flare burned like a miniature sun, casting stark shadows through the fog and revealing the thing's true size. It was even larger than I'd thought, more like a small horse than a large dog. "Run!" I shouted to Marcus and Janet. "Straight downhill. Don't stop for anything." They ran. I stood my ground, reloading the flare gun, and trying to figure out how to kill something that might already be dead. The creature shook its massive head, the fur around its eyes still smoldering. When it looked at me again, the red glow had intensified. "You cannot kill death itself, soldier." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can sure as hell try. I won't lie and say I defeated the thing. You can't fight something like that with flare guns and ranger training. But I learned something important in those final moments on Devil's Backbone Ridge. The creature was bound to this place, bound by the violence that had happened here over the centuries, bound by the blood that had soaked into these rocks. It could leave the immediate area, but not for long. And it needed fresh death to maintain its presence in our world. What I did was simple. I denied it that death. When it charged me, expecting me to run or cower or make some fatal mistake, I did something it didn't expect. I sat down on a rock and started talking about Vietnam, about the soldiers I'd treated, the ones I'd saved, and the ones I'd lost, about how death had been my companion for so long that seeing it again, even in this form, felt almost like meeting an old friend. The creature stopped, confused. Here was a man who should have been terrified, who should have been running or fighting or dying. Instead, I was just talking. "You know what I learned as a medic?" I said. "Death isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose. Every day, every minute, you choose to keep breathing, keep fighting, keep caring about other people. And as long as you keep choosing life, death has to wait." The red eyes dimmed slightly. "These mountains have seen enough death," I continued. "Cherokee families driven from their homes, young soldiers bleeding out in the snow, hikers who made one wrong step. Maybe it's time for something different. Maybe it's time for life to have a turn." I don't know if the creature understood what I was saying, or if it just realized I wasn't going to provide the fear it needed to feed. But after what felt like hours, it turned and melted back into the fog, heading deeper into the mountains where the old battlefields lay quiet under their blanket of ice. I found Marcus and Janet at my truck, hypothermic but alive. We drove them to the hospital in Asheville, where the doctors treated them for exposure and shock. Tom Weatherby's body was never found, though search teams combed the area for weeks. The official report listed his death as a hiking accident. Lost in fog, probable fall from cliff face. It happens more often than people think on Devil's Backbone Ridge, but I know better. And now, 3 decades later, so do you. The strange thing is what happened to me after that night. Something changed during my encounter with that creature. Maybe it was the proximity to so much death, or maybe something about the way it looked at me. But I started seeing things I'd never seen before. I could tell when someone was carrying death with them. Not necessarily about to die, but walking closer to that edge than most people. I saw it in the eyes of hikers who'd pushed too hard, climbers who'd grown careless, drivers who'd been drinking before taking the mountain curves. Sometimes I could help. A suggestion to rest, to turn back, to take a different route. Other times, I could only watch and wait for the call that I knew would come. I retired from the Park Service in 1995, but I still live in these mountains. Still hike the trails, though I avoid Devil's Backbone Ridge on foggy days. And sometimes, when the conditions are just right, heavy fog, ice on the rocks, the kind of weather that makes people careless, I hear that deep growling echoing through the valleys. The creature is still out there, still watching, still waiting for the next person who'll make that final mistake. So if you ever find yourself hiking the Blue Ridge Parkway, especially around Devil's Backbone Ridge, remember this story. Pay attention to the weather. Listen to the rangers when they say a trail is closed. And if you see red lights glowing in the fog, if you hear something breathing in the darkness that sounds too big to be human, turn around. Walk away. Choose life, because death is patient. It can wait. And on Devil's Backbone Ridge, it's always watching. The Cherokee had a name for that ridge, long before white settlers arrived. They called it the place where the dead walk. They knew something lived there that shouldn't exist, something that fed on the boundary between life and death. We just called it the Devil's Backbone, not understanding that sometimes the old names are the truest ones. But I understand now. And every time I drive past that stretch of parkway, especially on foggy nights when the conditions are just right, I say a little prayer for anyone foolish enough to be walking those trails. Because up there in the mist and shadows, something is always hunting. Something that's been waiting for over a century. Patient as stone, hungry as winter. And sooner or later, everyone's number comes up, even mine. My name is Robert Carnahan, and I've been a ranger on these West Virginia rivers for 19 years. That's long enough to know every rapid, every rock, every dangerous current from here to the New River Gorge. Long enough to pull 17 drowning victims from the water, some still breathing, some not. Long enough to stop believing in ghost stories. Until the spring of 1954, when I fished something out of the Gauley River that shouldn't exist. People ask me why I became a river ranger. The answer's simple, even if it hurts to say. My little brother Danny drowned when I was 16, fell through ice on a pond back home in Ireland. By the time I pulled him out, his lips were blue and his eyes were empty. I was the big brother. I was supposed to protect him. So yeah, I learned to swim, got good at it too. Joined the army, served in Korea, came back and found work where I could save the people my brother couldn't be. These mountains reminded me of home, green and wild and full of secrets. The Gauley River runs through a gorge so deep that some parts only see sunlight for a few hours each day. The cliffs rise 1,000 feet on either side, covered in pine and rhododendron. The water runs cold and fast, fed by springs that come up from somewhere dark and ancient. Class V rapids in places, the kind that can flip a raft or pin a kayak against a rock and hold it there until the river decides to let go. It was beautiful. It was deadly, and it was mine to watch over. Spring of '54 brought heavy rains. The river swelled up brown and angry, carrying whole trees down from the mountains. I spent most of April warning folks to stay off the water, putting up signs, turning back the foolish ones who thought they knew better. By early May, the river had calmed down some. Still high, still fast, but manageable for experienced rafters. That's when the Hendersons came through, a group of 5 from Charleston who'd been running these rivers for years. I knew them. Good people. Careful people. They put in at the usual spot on a Thursday morning. Weather was clear. Water conditions were as good as they'd get. Tom Henderson waved to me from the lead raft. "See you at the takeout, Bobby," he called. I waved back. "Stay right of the big boulder at Miller's Drop." That was the last time anyone saw them alive. They never made it to the takeout point. When they didn't show up by evening, I got worried. When they didn't show up by morning, I got scared. I called in the state police and organized a search party. We found the rafts first, both of them, floating in a calm section of river called the Pool. A wide, deep spot where the water barely moves. No rocks, no rapids, nothing that should have caused trouble. The rafts were intact. No holes, no tears. The paddles were still strapped in, but there was blood. A lot of it, dried dark on the yellow rubber. We found the bodies over the next 2 days. 3 of them washed up on rocks downstream. The other 2 we had to dive for. I've seen drowning victims before. Hell, I've pulled enough of them out. But these were different. These had been torn apart. Tom Henderson's body had bite marks on it, massive curved wounds that took chunks of flesh the size of dinner plates. His wife Sarah's body was missing an arm, torn off at the shoulder. The ragged edge of the wound looked like it had been ripped, not cut. The state police brought in a wildlife expert. He took one look and went pale. "Nothing that lives in this river could do this," he said quietly. "These bites. The jaw that made these would have to be enormous." "Bear?" I suggested, even though I knew it was stupid. "Bears don't hunt in rivers." He shook his head. "The teeth pattern is wrong, and these people drowned first. Their lungs were full of water. Whatever bit them did it while they were underwater." That night, I sat in my ranger station and tried to make sense of it. Tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe they'd capsized somehow, got pulled under, got caught in some underwater current or cave system. Maybe the bite marks came after, from fish or turtles, but I kept seeing Tom Henderson's body in my mind. Those massive, curved wounds, the torn flesh, the look of terror still frozen on his face. My radio crackled. It was Susan Walsh, another ranger who worked the northern section. "Bobby, you there?" "Yeah, I'm here. I'm down by the bridge at Carnifex Ferry. You need to see this." "What is it?" Her voice dropped low. "Just come. And bring a camera." I drove down to Carnifex Ferry Bridge in the dark, my truck's headlights cutting through the mountain fog. Susan was waiting on the bridge, shining her flashlight down at the water. Even from a distance, I could see she was shaking. "What'd you find?" I asked, walking up beside her. She didn't say anything, just pointed her light at the rocks below. There were marks on them, deep grooves in the stone, like something with claws had scraped down the length of the boulder. The marks were fresh. I could see where chips of rock had fallen into the water below. Could be from the flood, I said. Debris scraping past. Look at the pattern, Bobby. I looked closer. The grooves were evenly spaced. Parallel, like fingers. And there's more, Susan said. She led me down to the riverbank and shined her light into the shallows. Scales. Dozens of them, caught on the rocks and branches. They were huge, bigger than my hand, and they shimmered in the flashlight beam with colors that seemed to shift and move. Blue-green, then silver, then almost gold. I picked one up. It was thick and hard, like armor. The underside still had bits of flesh attached. What kind of fish grows scales like this? Susan asked. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. We searched the area for another hour, finding more scales, more claw marks, and then Susan found the tracks. They were in the mud at the water's edge, deep impressions that looked almost like footprints, but wrong. Too long, with too many toes. Whatever made them had to be massive. I took photographs of everything. Not that it mattered. Who was I going to show them to? The state police? They'd already written the Henderson deaths off as a tragic rafting accident. The newspapers were running stories about dangerous spring conditions and inexperienced rafters, even though the Hendersons had been running these rivers for a decade. There's something else, Susan said quietly. Old Johnny Blackfeather came by my station yesterday. You know him? I nodded. Johnny was Cherokee, one of the few who still lived in these mountains. He was probably 90 years old, though nobody knew for sure. Most people thought he was crazy. What'd he say? He said, the Ogwa is awake. The word sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard the legends, of course. Every ranger in these mountains had. The Ogwa, the river demon that lived in the deep places and dragged people down to drown. Old Cherokee stories, the kind you tell around campfires to scare tourists. Susan, I know what you're thinking, she interrupted. Same thing I thought. Hillbilly nonsense. But Johnny said something else. He said his grandfather saw the Ogwa once, back in 1889. Said it came up because white men were cutting down too many trees, muddying the water. His grandfather said the Ogwa killed 6 loggers before it went back to sleep. And you believe him? She looked at me with tired eyes. I believe 5 people are dead with bite marks that nothing in this river should be able to make. I believe something left those scales. Those claw marks. Those tracks. So yeah, Bobby, I'm starting to believe. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her she was being ridiculous. But I kept seeing those scales in my mind, shimmering with impossible colors. The next incident happened 3 days later. A team of divers came up from the state to search the river bottom near where we'd found the rafts. They were looking for evidence, trying to figure out what had happened. Professional divers, ex-Navy guys with years of experience. I was coordinating from a boat on the surface when the radio squawked. Surface! Surface now! The diver's voice was high and panicked. Both divers came up too fast, but they didn't care about decompression. They thrashed toward the boat, and we hauled them in. One of them, a guy named Miller, was white as a sheet. What happened? I demanded. Something down there, he gasped. Something big. It brushed against me. I felt it. What was it? A log? A car? It was alive. He looked me dead in the eye. It was warm, and it was moving against the current. The other diver nodded. We both felt it. Something massive. We saw a shadow, and then it was just gone. Disappeared into one of those underwater caves. How big? I asked. Miller held his hands about 6 feet apart. The part that touched me? About this wide. But the shadow? He shook his head. The shadow looked 50 feet long. Maybe more. They refused to go back down. I didn't blame them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tom Henderson's body, about those scales, about a shadow 50 feet long moving through the water. Around midnight, I heard something outside my station, a sound like singing, low and musical and completely wrong. It seemed to come from the river itself, echoing up through the gorge. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The sound got louder. It wasn't words exactly. More like a melody that made my head feel fuzzy, made me want to walk toward the water. I shook my head, trying to clear it. The singing continued, and then I saw it. Just for a second, in the moonlight reflecting off the river. Something massive broke the surface near the bridge, a long, serpentine shape covered in those shimmering scales. It rose up about 20 feet out of the water, and I saw what looked like a head, flat and wide, with eyes that glowed with a pale blue light. Then it was gone. Slipped back under the surface without a splash, and the singing stopped. I stood there shaking, my flashlight beam dancing across empty water. River monsters were hillbilly nonsense. That's what I'd always believed. But I'd just seen something impossible, and I knew, with cold certainty, that it had been watching me. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen that night. Who would believe me? Hell, I barely believed it myself. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was a trick of the moonlight, a log floating past, my tired brain making patterns out of nothing. Then the fish started dying. It happened in a specific section of the river, about 2 miles downstream from where the Hendersons had died. The fish just floated up bass. Catfish, trout, hundreds of them. They weren't rotted or diseased. They looked healthy, except for being dead. Susan and I went down to investigate. The water in that section looked normal, flowed normal, smelled normal. But when I stuck my hand in, I pulled it back fast. "It's warm," I said. "The water's warm here." "That's impossible," Susan said. "This is mountain spring water. It's supposed to be cold." We tested the temperature, 78 degrees in that one section. Everywhere else, the river ran at 52 degrees. "Something's heating the water," I said. "Something big enough to change the temperature of a whole section of river." That afternoon, we got a call from a local farmer. His daughter was missing. 8-year-old girl named Emma Cobb who'd been playing near the river on their property. We organized a search party immediately. 20 volunteers combing the riverbank, calling her name. I had a sick feeling in my stomach the whole time. We found her just before dark. She was sitting on a rock in the middle of the river, in water that should have been too deep and fast for a child to reach. She was soaking wet and shivering, staring straight ahead. I waded out to get her. The water pulled at my legs, trying to knock me down. "Emma? Emma, honey, can you hear me?" She didn't respond, just kept staring at the water with blank eyes. I picked her up and carried her back to shore. She felt cold as ice, even though she'd been sitting in that warm section of river. The paramedics wrapped her in blankets and checked her vitals. Physically, she was fine, but she wouldn't talk, wouldn't even look at us. Her father was crying. "What happened to her? Emma, baby, please say something." Finally, she spoke. Her voice was tiny and far away. "The pretty lady wanted me to swim with her," Emma whispered. She was singing. She had lights all over her skin, like stars. She said the water was nice and warm. She said I should come down deep and stay forever. "What pretty lady?" I asked gently. "The one in the river. She's still there. She's waiting for someone else." Emma's eyes finally focused on me. "She told me to tell the riverman. She said you knew about her. She said you saw her watching." My blood went cold. I'd told no one about what I'd seen that night. No one. "She said her name," Emma continued. "Ogwa. She said her name is Ogwa, and the river belongs to her. The girl's father took her home. I heard later that she didn't speak again for 3 months. That night, Susan and I sat in my ranger station, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "We need to tell someone," Susan said. "This is getting out of control." "Tell them what? That there's a river monster? They'll think we're crazy. 5 people are dead, Bobby. And that little girl, whatever she saw down there, I know." I slammed my hand on the desk. "Don't you think I know? But who's going to believe us? We don't even have proof. Just some scales and claw marks and dead fish," and I stopped, because through the window I could see something in the river. Lights, blue-green lights moving beneath the surface, like someone had dropped glow sticks into the water. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pulsing in a pattern that looked almost like breathing. Susan saw them too. "What is that?" "I think it's the scales," I said quietly. "I think they glow." The lights moved slowly upstream, against the current. As they passed under the bridge, I could make out a shape long and serpentine, easily 50 feet from head to tail, maybe more. The water rippled around it but didn't splash. And then it surfaced. The head came up about 30 feet from my station. It was flat and wide, like a snake's head, but bigger than a car. The scales covering it shimmered and glowed with that eerie blue-green light. Its eyes were huge and intelligent, glowing with a pale luminescence. It looked directly at me through the window. "Holy Mother of God," Susan whispered. The creature opened its mouth. I saw rows of curved teeth, each one as long as my forearm. But it didn't attack. Instead, it made that sound again, that low, musical singing that made my head feel fuzzy. And suddenly, I wasn't in my station anymore. I was standing in the river, underwater but somehow breathing. The creature was there, circling me slowly. When it got close, I could feel warmth radiating from its body. That's what was heating the water. Images flashed through my mind, not words, but feelings and pictures. I saw the river as it used to be, crystal clear, teeming with fish, with trees coming down to the water's edge. I saw people who looked like Johnny Blackfeather's ancestors, showing respect to the river, taking only what they needed. Then I saw the changes. Trees being cut down, soil washing into the water, turning it brown. A dam being built upstream. I recognized it, the Summersville Dam that had just been completed last year. I felt the creature's rage at having its river blocked and changed. I saw the Hendersons. They'd been dumping something in the water motor oil from their rafts. Just a little bit, probably not even on purpose. But the creature had smelled it, had seen it as poison in its river. The images came faster. I saw the logging company that operated near the northern fork, dumping wastewater. I saw the mine runoff from operations in the mountains. I saw everything that was hurting the river, and I understood. The Ogwa wasn't a monster, it was a guardian, and it was angry. The vision ended. I was back in my station, gasping for air. Susan was shaking me. "Bobby, Bobby, snap out of it." Through the window, the creature was sinking back beneath the surface. Its glowing scales dimmed until they disappeared. "It showed me," I gasped. "It showed me everything. Why it's killing people, what it wants." "What does it want?" I looked at her with tears in my eyes. "It wants its river back. It wants us to stop poisoning it. And if we don't..." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. The tourist season was starting in 2 weeks. Dozens of rafting groups had already booked trips down the Gauley River. And the Ogwa was hunting. The next morning, I drove up to Johnny Blackfeather's cabin. It took an hour on rough mountain roads, but I had to know more. I had to understand what we were dealing with. Johnny was sitting on his porch, carving a piece of wood. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You've seen her," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I've seen her." He nodded slowly. "My grandfather said the Ogwa had been sleeping for a long time. 50 years, maybe more. The river was getting cleaner, healing from the old mining days. She didn't need to wake up." "What changed?" "The dam," Johnny said simply. "You block a river, you change everything." The Ogwa woke up and found her waters changed again, found new poisons, new wounds. So she hunts. How do we stop her? You don't stop her, you make peace with her. You give her what she wants. How? Johnny looked at me with ancient eyes. You're a riverman, you love these waters. She knows that. That's why she showed you the truth. She's giving you a choice, help her, or die with the rest. I drove back, thinking about what he'd said. Help her how? I was just a ranger. I couldn't stop the logging companies or the mining operations. I couldn't tear down a dam. But maybe I didn't have to. Maybe I just had to start somewhere. That afternoon, I called the state environmental office and filed formal complaints about the logging waste. I called the company that ran the rafting tours and told them they needed to be more careful about fuel and oil. I knew it wasn't enough, but it was something. Susan helped me put up new signs along the river, bigger, more serious warnings. We closed down the section where the Hendersons had died, designated it as a protected zone. We'd get in trouble for it later, but we didn't care. We thought we had time. We were wrong. 2 days later, a commercial rafting group went out. 20 tourists from Ohio, 3 guides, and 4 rafts. I'd warned them, told them about the dangerous conditions. They'd laughed it off. "We've been rafting all over the country," the lead guide said. "We can handle anything West Virginia throws at us." They put in at noon. By 2 o'clock, I got the emergency call. One of the rafts had disappeared, just vanished in the middle of the river. In a calm section, the other rafts had seen it happen. The water had suddenly started swirling, and the raft had been pulled down in a matter of seconds. I grabbed my gear and radioed Susan. "Meet me at the emergency dock. Bring the rescue boat." We were on the water in 10 minutes, racing upstream toward where the raft had gone down. The tourist boats were clustered near the bank, everyone standing up and pointing at the water. "There!" someone shouted. "Something's down there." I saw it immediately, the glowing scales, just beneath the surface. The Ogwa was circling something underwater. I could see the raft, or what was left of it, slowly sinking. "We have to get those people out," Susan said. "If we go in there, she'll kill us too." "Then what do we do?" I looked at the water, at the glowing shape circling below, at the terrified tourists watching from the bank. And I made a decision that would change everything. I killed the boat engine and stood up. "Stay here," I told Susan. "What are you doing?" "Something stupid." I dove into the water before she could stop me. The cold hit me like a punch, driving the air from my lungs. I forced myself to swim down, toward the glowing scales, toward the Ogwa. The creature sensed me immediately. It stopped circling and turned, its massive body moving through the water with impossible grace. I saw its eyes fix on me, pale blue and ancient. And then I was in that vision space again, underwater but breathing. The Ogwa hovered in front of me. Up close, it was even more massive than I'd thought, easily 60 feet long, with scales the size of dinner plates covering its body. But it was beautiful too, in a terrible way. The bioluminescent patterns on its scales pulsed with light, and I realized they formed shapes, mountains, rivers, trees. A map of the watershed. "Please," I said, or thought, or felt, "please don't kill them. They're stupid, but they're not evil. They're just people who don't understand." The creature's thoughts pressed into my mind. Not words, but concepts. The river was dying, slowly, over years, but dying. The dam had changed the flow. The runoff was poisoning the water. The fish were disappearing. Her home was being destroyed. "I know," I said. "I've seen it. You showed me. And I'll help you. I swear I'll help you. I'll spend the rest of my life protecting this river. Just, please, let these people go." The Ogwa studied me. I felt it probing my mind, testing my sincerity. Then it moved. I thought it was going to attack me. Instead, it swam down to the sinking raft and pushed it upward with its snout. The raft shot to the surface like a cork. I heard screaming from above. The creature came back to me. Its eyes glowed brighter, and I felt a surge of warmth through my whole body. It was marking me somehow, changing me. I could feel it in my bones. Then it spoke, not in words, but in a way I understood completely. "Asterisk, you are keeper now. Protect the waters. Speak for those who cannot speak. Stop the poisoning, or I will stop it myself." Asterisk, the vision ended. I was back in the regular river, my lungs burning for air. I kicked toward the surface and broke through, gasping. Susan had the boat right there. She hauled me in, shouting something I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. The tourist raft was floating nearby. All 6 people were alive, coughing up water but alive. The Ogwa had let them go. But I knew it was a one-time mercy. If we didn't change, if we didn't protect the river, next time there would be no survivors. The tourist incident made the news, but not in the way you'd think. The papers reported a dangerous whirlpool that had formed due to unstable river conditions. The tourists were interviewed, but their stories about seeing something massive in the water were dismissed as panic and confusion. Only Susan and I knew the truth, and we carried that truth like a weight. I kept my promise to the Ogwa, started filing complaints everywhere I could, the state environmental office, the EPA, even wrote letters to Congress. Most were ignored, but some got attention. The logging company near the Northern Fork got investigated and shut down for violations. The mining operations had to install better runoff systems. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough. But it was a start. Susan became something of a crusader. She quit the Ranger Service and joined an environmental group fighting dam projects throughout Appalachia. Last I heard, she'd helped stop 3 new dams from being built. As for me, I'm still here, still watching the river. But I'm different now. That warmth the Ogwa gave me never left. I can feel the river now, in a way I never could before. I know when it's healthy and when it's sick. I can sense pollution in the water from miles away. Sometimes I hear sounds that nobody else can hear: the river's voice, maybe, or the Ogwa's. I founded a river conservation group 2 years after the incident. We monitor water quality, organize cleanup efforts, and fight against anything that threatens the watershed. The locals think I'm obsessed. They're not wrong. The official death toll from that spring was 5, the Henderson group. The tourist raft incident was recorded as a near miss. Nobody talks about the fish die-offs or the little girl who didn't speak for 3 months. But I know other rangers have seen things now. Heard things. There are reports from other rivers throughout Appalachia: the New River, the Cheat River, the Tygart Valley. Strange deaths. Unexplained incidents. Massive shapes glimpsed beneath the surface. I think the Ogwa isn't alone. I think there are others, guardians of other waterways, waking up as their rivers change and sicken. The Cherokee legends talk about them: water spirits, river protectors. We thought they were just stories. We were wrong. Sometimes, late at night, I go down to the river and sit on the bank. And sometimes I see those glowing scales moving through the water, patrolling the depths. The Ogwa never surfaces anymore, but I know it's there. Watching. Waiting. The river sections where the incidents occurred are now designated as environmental protection zones. I made sure of that. No rafting, no fishing, minimal human contact. Let the river heal. People ask me why I'm so intense about river conservation now. Why I've dedicated my entire life to protecting these waters. I tell them it's because I've seen what happens when we don't. I tell them about the Henderson family, about the importance of clean water, about preserving nature for future generations. But the real truth? The truth I can't say out loud? I made a promise to something ancient and powerful, something that could kill me in seconds if it wanted to, something that protects these waters with a ferocity that humans can't match. And I've seen what it does to people who break that promise. So I keep my promise. Every day, every hour, because the Ogwa is still down there, still watching, still protecting its river. And if we don't take care of these waters, if we keep poisoning them, damming them, treating them like they belong to us instead of us belonging to them, the Ogwa will rise again. Next time, there won't be any mercy. Next time, there won't be any survivors. Next time, the river will take back what we've stolen, and the Ogwa will make sure we never forget. I know this because sometimes, when I'm standing by the water, I can still hear it singing. That low, musical sound that makes your head feel fuzzy and your feet want to walk toward the depths. It's a warning. It's a reminder. Respect the rivers. They remember who protects them, and they remember who doesn't. My name is Robert Carnahan, and I've been a river ranger for 21 years now. I'll keep doing this job until I die, because someone has to speak for the waters. Someone has to stand between the river and those who would destroy it. That someone is me, and the Ogwa is watching to make sure I don't fail. My name is Thomas Blackthorne, and for 13 years I've been cleaning up the messes that mining companies leave behind. I'm a park ranger now, but before that I was a mining engineer. I know these mountains. I know how coal seams run through rock like black veins. I know the smell of methane gas and the sound of timber rotting in old shafts. Most people don't want this job. They look at the abandoned mines in Jefferson National Forest and see dangerous holes in the ground. I see my grandfather's grave. He died in a collapse back in 1959, crushed under 1 million tons of stone. They never got his body out. Maybe that's why I'm good at what I do. I understand what these places mean. They're not just hazards to be marked on maps. They're graveyards. Pole Creek was the worst site I'd ever managed. Back in 1952, the main shaft flooded during a storm. 67 miners were working the night shift when the water came. It happened so fast they didn't have time to run. The company sealed everything the next week, poured concrete over the entrances, and walked away. The bodies are still down there, 300 feet under my boots. It was late November when the trouble started. The fog came in thick that year, settling into the valleys and staying there. Everything felt damp and cold. The trees were bare, black branches reaching up like skeleton fingers. I was sitting in my truck, drinking coffee and filling out paperwork, when my radio crackled. "Thomas, you there?" It was Rita Maxwell, a safety inspector I'd worked with on other sites. "Yeah, what's up? Got something weird at Coal Creek. Construction crew called it in. They're saying they hear sounds underground." I set down my coffee. "What kind of sounds?" "Mining sounds. Pickaxes, maybe voices." I felt something cold move through my chest. "That's impossible. Those shafts have been sealed for 30 years. "I know. But these guys are spooked. Won't go back to work. Can you come check it out?" 20 minutes later, I was standing at the old mine site with Rita and 3 construction workers. They were supposed to be building a new visitor center, but their equipment sat silent. The men stood in a tight group, smoking cigarettes with shaky hands. "Show me," I said. The foreman, a big guy named Carl, pointed at a section of exposed earth where they'd been digging the foundation. "We were running the backhoe this morning. Regular work. Then Bobby shut down the engine to move some rocks, and that's when we heard it." "Heard what?" "Tapping. Like metal on stone, rhythmic, you know? Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap." I knelt down and put my hand on the ground. Could be water moving through old tunnels. Could be rocks settling. "That's what I thought," Carl said. But then we heard the singing. The hair on my arms stood up. "Singing?" Bobby, a younger worker with a pale face, nodded. "Mining songs. Old ones. My granddad used to sing them. I'd know those tunes anywhere." I pulled out my equipment, a seismograph for measuring ground vibrations and a gas detector for checking air quality. Standard procedure. I was looking for methane leaks or structural problems, not ghosts, but when I turned on the seismograph, my hands went still. The needle was moving. Not random vibrations, regular patterns, like footsteps, like tools hitting rock. "That's not possible," I said quietly. Rita leaned over my shoulder. "What's it showing?" I pointed at the readings. "Activity. Rhythmic. Coming from about 200 feet down. But those shafts are flooded. Sealed. Nobody's been down there since 1952. I stood up and walked toward the old mine entrance, a concrete wall built into the hillside. The construction work had exposed part of it. And there, at the base of the seal, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice water. Fresh coal dust. Black powder in a neat line, like someone had swept it out from under the concrete. "When did this appear?" I asked. Carl came closer. "It wasn't there yesterday. I swear it. That concrete hasn't been touched in decades." I took a sample of the dust, sealed it in a bag. My mind was racing through explanations. Underground pressure changes, gas pockets, illegal mining operations. But deep in my gut, I knew something was wrong. The kind of wrong that makes you want to run. Rita checked her equipment, then looked at me with worried eyes. "Thomas, the air pressure here is all messed up. It's like something is moving down there, pushing air through cracks." I didn't answer. I was staring at something else I'd just noticed. There were marks in the dust. Not animal tracks, not machinery, boot prints. The kind miners wore in the 1,950 seconds. I told the construction crew to take the rest of the day off. They didn't argue. By the time the sun was setting, Rita and I were alone at the site, setting up monitoring equipment around the sealed mine entrances. "You think someone broke in?" Rita asked, stringing sensor cable between metal stakes. "I don't know what I think. I was drilling a hole for a ground microphone, a device that could pick up sounds from deep underground. But we need to document whatever's happening before we file a report." The fog was getting thicker. It rolled down the mountain in waves, turning the trees into gray shadows. The temperature was dropping fast. My breath came out in white clouds. Rita finished with the sensors and came to stand beside me. My grandmother was from coal country. She used to tell stories about mines like this one. "What kind of stories?" "The kind where miners who died bad deaths don't rest easy." She said they keep working their shifts, waiting for someone to bring them home. I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to tell her those were just superstitions. But I was remembering my grandfather, trapped forever in collapsed tunnels. And the laugh died in my throat. The ground microphone finally locked into place. I connected it to my headphones and listened. At first, nothing. Just the hiss of underground water and the creak of old timber. Then I heard it. Tap, 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 rhythmic, steady, the sound of metal striking coal. "Rita," I said quietly, "come here." She put on the second pair of headphones. Her face went pale. The tapping continued. Then, faint but clear, voices. Men singing an old mining ballad. I recognized it, Down in the Coal Mine, a song from the early 1900s. "That's impossible," Rita whispered. "Those shafts are underwater. Nobody could be alive down there." I was about to answer when all the sensors went crazy at once. Every meter started beeping. The seismograph needle jumped. The ground microphone screeched with feedback, and from beneath our feet came a sound like a train rushing through a tunnel. We both jumped back. The ground wasn't shaking, but I could feel it, a vibration so deep it made my bones ache. Then, silence. Complete, total silence. Even the wind stopped. Rita grabbed my arm. "Look!" She was pointing at the concrete seal. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see something moving beneath the surface. Shadows, shifting and flowing like water, but inside, solid concrete. "We need to leave," Rita said. "Right now." But I was frozen, watching those shadows. They were forming shapes. Human shapes. Men in mining gear, their silhouettes pressed against the barrier like people trying to get out. Then one of the shadows moved closer. I could see details now. A helmet, suspenders, a pickaxe in one hand. The shadow raised its tool and struck the concrete from inside. A crack appeared, small but real. A line of black running through the gray. "Thomas!" Rita was pulling me backward. "Move!" I stumbled away from the seal, my heart hammering. The shadows were everywhere now, dozens of them, all pressing against the concrete. More cracks appeared, spreading like spider webs. We ran to my truck, threw the equipment in the back, and got inside. I locked the doors, stupid, useless, but I did it anyway. "What the hell was that?" Rita's voice was shaking. "I don't know." I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. "But we need to." I stopped. In the rearview mirror, I could see the mine entrance. There were men standing there. Real men, solid and clear in the fog. They wore old mining clothes, canvas pants, wool shirts, hard hats with carbide lamps. They were covered in coal dust. Their faces black except for their eyes. They were staring at us. "Drive," Rita said. "Drive now." I started the engine. The men didn't move. They just watched as we backed away, their lamps glowing like yellow eyes in the darkness. As we turned onto the main road, I looked back one more time. The men were gone, but the mine entrance was different now. The concrete seal had a hole in it, roughly the size of a man, and from that hole, light was spilling out the warm, flickering glow of carbide lamps. We drove in silence for 5 miles before either of us could speak. "We can't report this," Rita finally said. "Nobody will believe us." "I don't care if they believe us. We need to seal that hole before something worse happens." "Something worse?" "Thomas, we just saw dead miners. What could be worse?" I didn't answer, because I was remembering something my grandfather once told me. He said the worst thing about dying in a mine collapse wasn't the darkness or the pain. It was knowing you'd be trapped there forever, that nobody would ever bring you home. What if those men didn't know they were dead? What if they'd been working their shift for 30 years, waiting for someone to tell them they could stop? My phone rang. It was Carl, the construction foreman. "Thomas, you need to get back here. Now." "What happened?" "It's Bobby. He went back to the site. Said he forgot his tools. He's been down there for 2 hours and he's not answering his radio." My stomach dropped. We're on our way. When we got back to Coal Creek, Carl's truck was parked at a crazy angle, driver's door still open. We could hear him shouting Bobby's name. The hole in the concrete seal was bigger now, big enough for a man to crawl through. "Bobby!" Carl was standing at the entrance, shining his flashlight into the darkness. "Answer me!" I grabbed his shoulder. "Don't go in there. My guy is missing. I'm not leaving him." "Carl, listen to me. There's something wrong with this place, something dangerous." But he pulled free and stepped toward the hole. That's when we heard Bobby scream. The scream came from deep underground, echoing up through the hole like it was traveling through miles of tunnel. It started as fear, then turned to pain, then cut off suddenly. Carl lunged for the entrance. I grabbed him around the waist and hauled him back. "Let me go. That's my worker. You can't help him if you're dead too." Rita was on her radio, calling for emergency services, but I knew they wouldn't get here in time. Whatever was happening to Bobby was happening now. I made a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. Rita, get the climbing gear from my truck. Carl, I need every light you have. You're going in? Rita's eyes were wide. I have to. 10 minutes later, I was geared up, climbing harness, rope, helmet with a lamp, and a radio clipped to my belt. Carl had brought 3 industrial work lights, and we set them up around the hole. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, I told Rita, seal this entrance. Pour concrete, drop rocks, I don't care, seal it. Thomas, promise me. She nodded, tears in her eyes. 30 minutes. I crawled through the hole. The passage was narrow and dripping wet. The concrete was 3 feet thick, but it had crumbled like old bread. Beyond it, the tunnel opened up into the old mine shaft. I stood up slowly, letting my light sweep across the space. The shaft was exactly as it should have been abandoned, flooded with a few feet of black water, timber supports rotting and sagging. But it felt wrong. The air was too warm, and there was light ahead, deeper in the mine. That yellow glow of carbide lamps. Bobby, my voice echoed. Can you hear me? No answer. Just the drip of water and a sound like wind moving through distant tunnels. I waded forward, the water soaking through my boots. The passage sloped downward, the light ahead got brighter. Then I saw the lunch pails, 3 of them, sitting on a dry ledge beside the tunnel, metal lunch boxes with rust on the latches. I picked one up with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a sandwich, wrapped in wax paper. Fresh. The bread wasn't moldy. The paper wasn't yellowed. I turned the lunch pail over. On the bottom, carved into the metal, J. McKenna, 1952. Joe McKenna, I knew that name. He'd been the crew chief on the night shift when the flood came. His name was on the memorial plaque above ground. Oh God, I whispered. That's when I heard the singing again. Closer now. Multiple voices, harmonizing on that old mining song. Asterisk, down in the coal mine underneath the ground. Asterisk, the tunnel ahead opened into a larger chamber. I could see movement in there. Shadows dancing in lamplight. Asterisk, where the gleam of sunshine never can be found. Asterisk, I should have run. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and get out, but Bobby was down here somewhere, and I couldn't leave him. I stepped into the chamber. It was full of miners. They were working, swinging pickaxes, shoveling coal into carts, hauling timber for supports, dozens of them, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this job their whole lives. They were transparent. I could see through them, see the rock wall behind their bodies. But they seemed solid too, the way they gripped their tools and moved their feet. None of them looked at me. They just kept working, kept singing that song. I recognized some of their faces from old photographs in the visitor center. Young men and old men, all wearing the same coal dust, all carrying the same tired determination. Asterisk, digging all the day in the darkness of the mine. Asterisk. Then I saw Bobby. He was standing against the far wall, frozen like a statue. His eyes were open, but he wasn't blinking. His mouth hung slack. One of the ghost miners, a tall man with a thick mustache, was standing in front of him, holding a carbide lamp up to Bobby's face. Bobby! I ran toward him, splashing through the water. Every ghost stopped working at once. The singing cut off mid-word. 50 transparent faces turned toward me. The silence was worse than any sound. The tall miner with the mustache, I knew him from the lunch pail. This was Joe McKenna, stepped away from Bobby and walked toward me. His boots splashed in the water. Real splashes, like he had real weight. You shouldn't be here, he said. His voice was rough, the accent from a different time. This is our mine. Our shift. I'm taking my friend and leaving. I tried to keep my voice steady. Nobody leaves until the shift is done. That's the rule. McKenna tilted his head, studying me. You're a mining man. I can see it in how you stand. You know the rules. The shift ended 30 years ago. You died. All of you died in the flood. The ghosts muttered among themselves. Some looked confused. Others looked angry. No, McKenna said firmly. We're working. We're digging coal. The foreman said 12 tons by midnight, and we'll deliver 12 tons. That's the job. I understood then. They didn't know. They died so fast, so suddenly, that they never realized it happened. They were stuck in that last shift, working forever, waiting for a quitting time that would never come. "Joe," I said quietly, using his first name. "The flood came. The pumps failed. The water filled the tunnels in 3 minutes. You tried to save your crew, but it was too fast. You all drowned." His face darkened. "You're lying." "I'm not. Check your watch. What time is it?" He looked down at his wrist. His expression changed, confusion spreading across his face. "It says 11:47, but we've been working for." He looked around at his crew, at the coal piled in the carts. "We've been working for 30 years, I said. "You've been working for 30 years without rest. Joe, the shift is over. You can stop now." Something happened to the air in the chamber. It got colder. The lamplight flickered and changed, turning from yellow to a sickly green. "No." McKenna's voice changed too, getting deeper, angrier. "No, the shift isn't over. The work isn't done. We have a quota. We have families who need this pay. We can't stop. We won't stop." The other miners were moving closer now, surrounding me. Their faces weren't confused anymore. They were determined, possessive. "This is our mine," one of them said. "Our coal," said another. "Our shift." Nobody takes the coal. Nobody interrupts the work. I realized my mistake. I'd broken their loop, shattered their belief that they were still alive and working, and instead of freeing them, I'd made them desperate, dangerous. "I'm sorry," I said, backing toward Bobby. "I'm sorry you died. I'm sorry nobody brought you home. But I need to take my friend and leave." "Nobody leaves," McKenna said. His pickaxe was in his hands now. All the miners had picked up their tools. They started moving toward me, slow and purposeful, like water filling a space. I grabbed Bobby and slapped him hard across the face. His eyes focused. "Run!" I shoved him toward the tunnel exit. The miners rushed forward. I'd studied mine collapses for 13 years. I knew what walls did when they failed, how timber splintered, how rock fell. But nothing prepared me for the sound of 50 ghost miners charging at once. Their boots hammered the ground, real sounds, real weight. Their voices rose in a roar of anger. Tools swung through the air, pickaxes and shovels reflecting lamplight. Bobby was running, stumbling through the water. I was right behind him, yanking my radio free. "Rita, seal the entrance. Do it now. But you're still. Do it." The tunnel was narrow. The miners couldn't all fit at once, but they poured in like water finding cracks. I could hear them behind me, feel the air pressure change as they moved. Bobby tripped. I hauled him up by his collar and pushed him forward. "Keep moving, don't stop." The entrance was ahead, that blessed hole in the concrete, light spilling through from Rita's work lamps. 50 feet. 30 feet. Something grabbed my ankle. I went down hard, face first into the water. Hands cold, strong, real pulled me backward. I kicked and twisted, but the grip was iron. "You disrespected our sacrifice." It was McKenna's voice, right in my ear. "You said we died for nothing." "I didn't." I choked on water. "I said you could rest." "Rest?" He yanked me around to face him. This close, I could see through him, see the rock wall behind his head. But his hands on my shoulders were solid as stone. "We worked ourselves to death in these tunnels. Died in darkness, in fear, bodies never recovered. And you think we should rest? We're miners. We work. It's all we have left." Other miners crowded around, their faces twisted with decades of trapped rage and sorrow. "My kids never got my last paycheck," one said. "My wife remarried, thought I abandoned her," said another. "They closed the mine and forgot us," a third spat. "Sealed us in like garbage." I understood then. It wasn't about the work. It was about being remembered, being honored, being more than just names on a plaque. "Joe," I said, forcing myself to stay calm even as water filled my lungs. "I know about forgotten miners. My grandfather died in a collapse. He's still buried in a sealed shaft, just like you. No funeral, no body to bury, just gone." McKenna's grip loosened slightly. "I became a ranger to prevent that," I continued. "To make sure mines are safe. To make sure when disasters happen, people remember. I've spent 13 years documenting these sites, creating memorials, honoring workers who died in darkness." "Words don't bring us home," McKenna said, but his voice had lost its edge. "No, but they matter. They keep you from being forgotten." I met his eyes, strange to look at, eyes you could see through. I swear to you, on my grandfather's unmarked grave, I will make sure people remember Coal Creek. I will make sure your names are spoken with respect. I will fight to protect this place as your memorial." The miners were silent, watching. "But you have to let me go," I said. "And you have to let Bobby go." He didn't know. He was just doing his job like you did yours. McKenna studied my face for a long moment. Then he looked back at his crew. "Brothers," the miners muttered among themselves. I caught fragments. "He's a working man, knows the union oath, speaks for the dead." Finally, McKenna released me. "We'll let you live. But there are conditions." "Name them." "This mine stays closed. No construction. No visitors. This is our ground, bought with our blood." "Agreed. You build us a real memorial, not a plaque. A monument, with all our names, and our families' names, and the truth about how the company abandoned us." "I'll do it. And you tell our story. You make sure people know what it cost to dig the coal that lit their cities and warmed their homes." "I promise. On my life, I promise." McKenna nodded slowly. Then he did something that made my chest ache. He reached out and touched my shoulder, not grabbing, just touching. A gesture between workers, between brothers. "Go," he said. "Before we change our minds. The mountain is waking up, and when she's angry, we can't control what happens." As if on cue, the tunnel shook. Not the solid rumble of an earthquake. Something worse, the groan of old timbers finally giving way, the crack of rocks splitting along fault lines. "Bobby, move!" We ran. The water churned around us as the tunnel began to collapse. Behind us, the miners were singing again, but different now. Not a work song. A funeral hymn. The entrance was 10 feet away when the ceiling caved in. I threw myself forward, felt Bobby do the same. Rock crashed down where we'd been standing half a second before. Dust and debris exploded through the hole. Hands grabbed us, Rita and Carl, pulling us through, out into the cold night air. We scrambled away from the mine as the collapse spread. The ground sank, trees tilted and fell. The entire hillside seemed to fold in on itself, sealing the chambers below under thousands of tons of stone. Then, silence. We lay in the mud, coughing and gasping. The mine entrance was gone. Where the hole had been, there was only fresh earth and broken concrete. "Did you seal it?" I asked Rita between coughs. "Didn't have to," she said, her voice shaking. "It sealed itself." Bobby was curled in a ball, crying. Carl sat beside him, one hand on his shoulder. I stood up slowly and walked toward the collapsed area. The fog was lifting. The first light of dawn was touching the eastern sky. And there, on top of the fresh rubble, sat a miner's helmet. Old style, with a carbide lamp still attached. The lamp was lit, burning with a steady yellow flame. I picked up the helmet carefully, like a holy relic. On the inside rim, a name was scratched. "J. McKenna." "Thank you," I whispered. The lamp flickered once, then went out. They sent me home for 2 weeks after that. Stress leave, they called it. Rita got the same. Bobby quit the construction company and moved to Florida. Said he never wanted to see another mountain again. Carl backed up our story for what it was worth. He told investigators about the sounds, the singing, the way Bobby had been frozen in place. They nodded and wrote it down and classified the whole incident as structural collapse due to old mine instability. The official report made no mention of ghosts, but I kept my promise. It took 2 years and a lot of fighting with bureaucrats, but I got the memorial built. It sits at Coal Creek now, a black granite wall with all 67 names carved deep. Underneath each name we listed their families, wives, children, parents who waited for them to come home. The inscription reads, "They died in darkness so their families could live in light. They will not be forgotten." We dedicated it on the anniversary of the disaster. Families came, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the dead miners. We had a ceremony with union representatives and folk singers who performed the old mining ballads. When they sang "Down in the Coal Mine," I swear I heard other voices joining in, faint, like they were far away. But there. Rita stood beside me during the ceremony. She'd left the inspection service and now worked for a miners' rights organization, fighting for better safety standards and proper disaster recovery protocols. "Do you think they're at peace now?" she asked quietly. I touched my chest. Since that night, I'd had trouble breathing sometimes. My doctor said it was anxiety, but it felt like coal dust in my lungs, like I'd breathed the same air as those trapped miners. I don't know, I said, honestly, but they're remembered. That's something. The construction project was canceled. The area around Coal Creek is now a historic preservation site. No development allowed. On the anniversary each year, we hold a remembrance ceremony. More people come every time. Sometimes, when I'm at the site alone, I hear things. Tapping from underground, faint singing, the splash of boots in water. I don't investigate anymore. I just listen and remember, and make sure the memorial is clean. Other rangers have started reporting similar incidents at other mining disaster sites throughout Appalachia. Sounds, shadows, evidence of impossible activity. We don't talk about it officially, but we share stories in private. There's a network of us now, rangers and historians and family members, all dedicated to honoring the workers who died in America's mines. We document the disasters, we preserve the sites, we make sure the names are spoken out loud, because we learned something that night at Coal Creek, something the government reports will never acknowledge. The dead don't always rest easy. Not when they died badly, not when they were forgotten. And miners especially, they spent their lives in darkness, breaking their backs to fuel a nation's progress. They died in collapses and floods and explosions, often for companies that didn't even bother to recover their bodies. Those men, they earned better. They earned remembrance, they earned respect. So I keep my promises, I maintain the memorials, I tell their stories, and sometimes, on foggy nights, when I'm doing my rounds near old mine sites, I see them, transparent figures in outdated gear, carrying lunch pails and tools. They nod to me as they pass. A gesture between workers, between brothers. I nod back, because the dead miners are still out there, still walking their eternal shifts, still protecting the places where they fell, still waiting for someone to honor their sacrifice. And as long as I'm breathing, I'll make sure they're not forgotten. That's my job now. Not just maintaining forests and preventing disasters. I speak for the dead. And the dead, they're listening. My name is Catherine Ravencrest, and I've spent 9 years keeping people alive on Skyline Drive. That's what they don't tell you about being a park ranger. Sometimes your job isn't about the trees or the trails. Sometimes it's about standing between a desperate person and a 1,000-foot drop. I work nights, always have, ever since I left nursing. Shenandoah National Park gets quiet after dark, especially in winter. Most rangers prefer the day shift families, hikers, the occasional lost tourist. But I like the silence. Or I used to. It was January 1989 when everything changed. 3 months, 7 suicide attempts, all at the same spot. Raven Rock Overlook, mile marker 10.7 on Skyline Drive. I'd worked hundreds of crisis calls in my career. Psychiatric nursing teaches you to read people, to hear what they're not saying. But this was different. The thing about suicide clusters is they usually make sense. A celebrity dies, and suddenly you see copycats. A news story runs, and vulnerable people get ideas. I kept telling myself that's all this was. Winter depression, seasonal darkness, the usual explanations. But then the survivors started talking. The first one was a college kid named Danny. I found him at 2 a.m., standing on the stone wall at the overlook, swaying in the wind. His car was still running in the parking lot, door open, radio playing something soft and sad. "Danny," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm Catherine. I'm here to help." He didn't turn around. "She said you'd come." "Who said?" "The woman in white. She's been so kind to me." His voice was dreamy, far away. "She understands." I moved closer, slow and careful. The fog was thick that night, rolling up from the valley like something alive. "What does she understand?" "How tired I am. How much it hurts." He looked back at me then, and his eyes were empty in a way that made my skin crawl. "She said it's peaceful. Down there." She said I wouldn't be alone. I got him down, talked him through it, used every technique I'd learned, but his words stuck with me. The second attempt came a week later. A woman in her 40s, Janet, same overlook, Same time of night, same strange story. The woman in white showed me it was okay. She was married once. She knows about pain. I increased my patrols, installed emergency phones at the overlook, started keeping detailed notes. 7 attempts, and 5 of them mentioned the woman. A beautiful woman in an old-fashioned white dress. Sometimes they said she was crying, sometimes she was smiling, but she was always there, always encouraging, always understanding. Michael Torres, one of the day rangers, helped me research. He found the story buried in local archives, a small article from 1863. Evangeline Morrison, 22 years old, married on a bright October morning to Captain James Morrison, who left 3 days later to fight for the Confederacy. He died at Gettysburg. She received the news in November. On December 1st, she put on her wedding dress, walked to what was then called Raven's Peak, and jumped. People say she's still waiting for him, Michael said, showing me a grainy photocopy of the article. Local legend stuff. You know how it is. I did know. Every national park has ghost stories. Tourists love them. But tourists don't usually try to kill themselves because of them. The temperature always dropped at the overlook. I noticed it on my patrols 20 degrees colder than anywhere else on the drive, even on still nights. My breath would fog up suddenly. The fog itself seemed thicker there, like it was waiting for something. I'm not a superstitious person. 9 years of nursing knocked that out of me. When you've held someone's hand while they die, when you've cleaned up after suicides and talked down people from ledges, you learn that horror is human. It's chemical imbalances and childhood trauma and loneliness so deep it swallows you whole. But I couldn't explain the fabric. I found it on a Tuesday morning, doing a routine check of the overlook after a quiet night. White fabric, caught on a sharp rock about 10 feet down from the wall. I had to lean over pretty far to reach it, my radio crackling with static the whole time. It was silk, real silk, yellowed with age. The stitching was done by hand, tiny and perfect. I took it to the ranger station and showed Michael. That's old, he said, running his fingers over it carefully. Really old. Like 19th century old. Could have been there for years, I said. Caught in the wind. Catherine. He looked at me with those serious brown eyes. This is the exact style mentioned in the article. High-necked, lace collar. This is what Evangeline Morrison would have worn. I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to tell him it was a coincidence, that someone was playing a prank, that there had to be a logical explanation. But my hands were shaking as I held that piece of fabric. The emergency phones started malfunctioning that week. I'd test them during my shift, and they'd work fine. But when someone really needed them, when they stood at that overlook, feeling the pull of the darkness, the phones would go dead. Silent. Like the line had been cut, even though the wires were intact. Security cameras were next. We'd installed 2 at the overlook after the 4th attempt, angled to cover the whole area. Michael and I reviewed the footage together, looking for patterns, for anything that might explain what was happening. What we saw made no sense. The tape from attempt number 6 showed a teenage girl, maybe 17. She walked to the wall, looked out at the darkness, and started crying. Then she began talking. Her mouth moved, she gestured, she even laughed once, but she was completely alone. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. At 11:52, she climbed onto the wall. At 11:53, I appeared on camera, running from my patrol car. Who was she? Talking to? Michael asked. I shook my head. We rewound it, watched it again. The girl's head turned, tracking something moving along the wall. She smiled at empty air. She reached out her hand like someone was taking it. This can't be real, I said, but it was. And it was about to get worse. The next encounter happened to me. It was a Friday night, the coldest one yet. 14 degrees, ice on the road, fog so thick I had to drive 5 miles an hour. I almost didn't make my midnight patrol to Raven Rock. Almost turned around, but something pulled me forward. Duty, I told myself. Just doing my job. The overlook was empty when I arrived. My headlights cut through the fog, showing me the stone wall, the warning signs, the emergency phone that probably wouldn't work anyway. I left the engine running, stepped out into the cold. The silence hit me first. No wind, no animals, no distant sound of cars on the highway below. Just nothing, like someone had turned off the volume on the whole world. Then I heard it, singing. It was faint, beautiful. Like something from an old music box. A wedding song, I realized. The kind of thing you'd hear in a church, voices raised in celebration. But there was no church, no celebration, just me and the fog and that impossible music. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded wrong, swallowed up by the silence. The singing stopped. I walked toward the wall, my flashlight beam cutting through the white. My breath came out in clouds, but it was colder now than it had been seconds ago. Much colder. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. That's when I saw her. She stood at the wall, facing away from me. White dress, exactly like the fabric I'd found. Long dark hair falling down her back. She was so still she might have been a statue, except I could see the hem of her dress moving slightly, like there was a breeze I couldn't feel. "Ma'am," I said, my training kicking in. "Step away from the edge. Please." She didn't move. I got closer, one hand on my radio. "Ma'am, I'm Ranger Ravencrest. I need you to..." She turned around. I want to tell you she was scary. That she looked like a monster or a corpse or something obviously wrong. But that's not what made me freeze. What made me freeze was how beautiful she was. Young, maybe younger than I was. Perfect pale skin. Dark eyes that looked right through me, and a smile that was so sad it made my chest hurt. "Catherine," she said. Her voice was like the singing old and strange and too perfect. "You've been working so hard. How do you know my name? I know everything about you." She took a step toward me, and I saw the blood now. Dark stains on the white dress, spreading from her chest and stomach. "I know you're tired. I know you're lonely. I know you think about him every day. My ex-husband, dead 5 years from cancer. I never talked about it, never." "Who are you?" I whispered. "I'm Evangeline, and I'm here to help." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Back to my patrol car, hands shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. The woman Evangeline, the ghost, whatever she was, didn't follow. She just stood there at the wall, watching me with those sad, dark eyes. I called Michael from the ranger station. It was 2 a.m, but he answered on the second ring. "I saw her," I said. "I saw Evangeline Morrison." There was a long pause. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." "Michael, she knew things about me. Personal things. And her dress, it was covered in blood." "Where are you now?" "Station. I'm not going back there tonight." "Good. Stay there. I'm coming over." He arrived 20 minutes later with coffee and a box of old files. We spread them across my desk: newspaper clippings, historical society records, copies of death certificates, building a profile of a woman who'd been dead for 126 years. Evangeline Morrison, born 1841. Married el 15 de octubre de 1863. Widow del 3 de noviembre de 1863. Dead el 1 de diciembre de 1863. The article said they found her body 3 days later, at the bottom of the cliff. It mentioned the wedding dress. It mentioned that her eyes were open, like she was still looking for something. "She's not just haunting the place," Michael said, tracing his finger over a line of text. "Look at this. Local residents report hearing, singing, and weeping from the cliff face. Some claim to have seen a woman in white, beckoning them forward. This is from 1867. Catherine, she's been doing this for over 100 years. Doing what? Recruiting? Maybe. Or maybe she's just so lonely she can't help it. She reaches out to people who are already hurting, people who are already on the edge, and she pulls them over." Over the next 2 weeks, we had 4 more attempts. I managed to stop 3 of them. The 4th, a man named Robert Chen, 46 years old, father of 2, I didn't reach in time. I was 10 minutes away when the call came in. Another ranger spotted his car at the overlook, empty and running. By the time I got there, Robert was gone. We found him at sunrise, broken at the bottom of the cliff, still wearing his wedding ring. His wife told us he'd been depressed since his mother died. She said he'd been talking about a woman who understood him, who he'd met at the park. He said she was going to show him how to be free. His wife sobbed. I thought he meant a therapist. I started staying at Raven Rock. Not officially, I couldn't tell my supervisor I was camping out at a haunted overlook because a Civil War ghost was murdering visitors. But I parked my car there every night from midnight to 4 a.m. Waiting, watching. She appeared 3 times that week. The first time, she stood at the wall for an hour, just looking out at the darkness. I stayed in my car, watching her through the windshield. She never looked at me. Just stood there, perfectly still, like she was waiting for someone who would never come. The second time, she walked along the wall, running her hand over the stone. I could see her lips moving. Praying, maybe, or calling someone's name. When she reached the emergency phone, it sparked and died. She smiled. The third time, she brought friends. I was doing a patrol check, walking the perimeter with my flashlight, when I saw them. 5 figures in old-fashioned clothes, standing at the edge. 2 men in union uniforms. A young woman in a gray dress, an elderly man in a black suit. And Evangeline, in her bloody wedding dress, standing in the center. They were all looking at me. "Catherine," Evangeline said, "come meet my family. I wanted to run again. But I'm a ranger. This is my park. These are my people to protect, even if some of them are dead." "Who are they?" I asked. "Lonely ones. Like me. Like you." She gestured to the man in the uniform. "Thomas died at Chancellorsville. Sarah died in childbirth. William lost his son and couldn't bear it. They all came here. They all found peace. They all jumped," I said. "They all chose freedom." Evangeline took a step toward me. "Don't you want to choose it too? Don't you want to stop hurting?" The truth is, part of me did. That's what she was good at, finding the part of you that's broken and making it bigger. Making it fill up your whole world until jumping off a cliff seems reasonable. My husband's death had been hard. Watching him waste away, holding his hand while he died, going home to an empty house afterward. Some days the loneliness was so heavy I could barely breathe. Some days I understood why people came to this overlook. "I know you're in pain," I said to Evangeline. "I know you've been in pain for a long time. But this isn't the answer. Hurting other people won't bring him back." The other ghosts faded away like smoke. Only Evangeline remained, and now she looked different. Angry. The blood on her dress was fresh, dripping onto the stone. Her eyes weren't sad anymore. They were hungry. "You think you can save them?" she hissed. "You think your pretty words and your phone calls make a difference? I offer them peace. I offer them an end to suffering. What do you offer? More pain, more years of dragging themselves through empty days." "I offer hope," I said. "I offer the chance that tomorrow might be better." "Hope is a lie," Evangeline said. She was right in front of me now, so close I could smell death on her, old blood and earth and something sweet and rotting. I learned that when James died, when they told me he was gone and I had to keep breathing anyway. Every breath was agony, every heartbeat was torture, and everyone told me to have hope, that it would get better, that time would heal. They lied, Catherine. It never gets better, it just gets longer. Her hand touched my face. It was cold as ice, but solid. Real. "Let me help you," she whispered. "Let me end it. No more pain, no more loneliness, just peace, just silence, just sleep." And for one terrible moment, I wanted to. I wanted to climb that wall and step off into nothing. To let the fall take me, to let the darkness swallow me whole. It would be so easy, so quick. And she was right. I was tired. So tired. "No," I said. The word came out stronger than I expected. I pushed her hand away, stepped back. "No, Evangeline, you're wrong." Her face twisted. "You're just like the others, afraid, weak." "I'm not afraid of death," I said. "I've seen too much of it. But I'm also not going to let you keep killing people. These aren't mercy kills. This is murder. You're taking people who might have survived, who might have found reasons to keep living, and you're ending their stories before they're finished." "Their stories were always going to end badly," she said. "I'm just speeding it up. You don't know that. Robert Chen might have gotten better. That college kid Danny might have. Graduated, gotten married, had children. You're stealing futures because you can't have yours." Something shifted in her expression. The anger cracked, and underneath it was something raw and broken. He was my future. James was everything, and they took him from me. The war took him, and I was supposed to just continue, just keep living without him? How? How do you do that? And there it was, the real question, the one I'd been asking myself for 5 years. "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's different for everyone. But Evangeline, look at what you've become. Look at what grief has turned you into. Is this what James would want? For you to spend eternity hurting other people? She looked down at her hands, at the blood on her dress. When she looked up again, there were tears on her face. Real tears. I can't stop, she whispered. I don't know how to stop. The loneliness is so big, Catherine. It's so big it swallows everything. And when I find someone who understands, someone who feels it too, I just want them to join me. To keep me company. To make me feel less alone. I know, I said. And I did. I understood that desperate need for connection, that ache to be seen and known. But this isn't connection. This is destruction. Real connection means helping each other survive, not dragging each other down. I don't remember how to do that, Evangeline said. I've been alone for so long. Behind her, the sun was starting to rise. First light touching the mountains, turning the fog pink and gold. She turned to look at it, and something in her face changed. Softened. I haven't watched the sunrise in 100 years, she said. I'm always gone before it comes. Back in the dark, back in the moment of falling. You don't have to be, I said. Evangeline, you're stuck because you're holding on to one moment, one decision. But you were more than that. You were a whole person with a whole life. I don't remember, she said. I only remember the pain. Then let me help you remember. I took a breath, using every skill I'd learned in psychiatric nursing. Tell me about James. Not his death. Tell me about his life. What did you love about him? She looked at me like I'd suggested something impossible. But slowly, hesitantly, she started to talk. His laugh, she said. It was loud and embarrassing, and I loved it. He laughed at everything, bad jokes, pratfalls, his own mistakes. He made me laugh too, even when I was trying to be serious. A real smile crossed her face. He proposed to me in a rainstorm, got down on one knee in the mud. He was soaking wet and covered in dirt, and he looked ridiculous. It was perfect. What else? He was kind, really kind, not just polite. He remembered people's names. He helped his neighbors. When the war started, he didn't want to go, but he felt like it was his duty. Her voice broke. I was so angry at him for leaving. Our last conversation, I told him I'd never forgive him if he died. And then he did. And I kept my promise. I never forgave him. I never forgave myself. Evangeline, I said gently, he wouldn't want this. You know he wouldn't. No, she whispered. He'd hate what I've become. He'd be horrified. The sun was fully up now, bright and clear. Evangeline looked different in the daylight, less solid, more transparent. I could see through her to the mountains beyond. I don't know how to leave, she said. I don't know how to let go. Maybe you don't have to let go of James, I said. Maybe you just have to let go of the pain. Let go of that moment on the cliff. Remember the rest of it. The good parts. The love. She closed her eyes. The blood on her dress was fading, turning from red to pink to white. When she opened them again, they were different. Clearer. Will you do something for me? She asked. Will you tell people about him? Not about how he died. About how he lived. About his terrible jokes and his kindness and his ridiculous proposal. Will you help me remember him, right? I will, I promised. I'll make sure people know. She smiled. A real smile, not the sad or hungry ones I'd seen before. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for reminding me that I was more than my worst moment. The light grew brighter. Evangeline was fading into it, becoming part of the sunrise. One more thing, she said, her voice distant now. Don't stop doing what you do. Don't stop standing between people and the darkness. It matters. Even when it doesn't feel like it. It matters. Then she was gone. Michael found me sitting at the overlook at 7 a.m., watching the sun climb higher. He brought coffee and sat down next to me without asking questions. That's what I appreciate about him. He knows when to wait. She's gone, I finally said. Evangeline, I think she's really gone. What happened? I told him everything. The other ghosts, the confrontation, the conversation about James. I think she was just stuck. Stuck in her grief so long that it became all she was. She forgot there was anything else. And you helped her remember, Michael said. Maybe. Or maybe she was ready to remember. I don't know. I took a sip of coffee. It was good, strong, and hot. We should do something for her. For both of them, Evangeline and James. Michael nodded. There's a cemetery about 3 miles from here, Confederate section. I found James Morrison's grave there last week. Empty plot next to it. Evangeline's buried somewhere else? Not exactly buried. She was a suicide. They didn't always allow that in church cemeteries back then. He looked at me carefully. But I think we could fix that. Unofficially. A marker, at least. Something to say she was loved. That she mattered beyond that one terrible day. We did it the following week. Simple stone marker, placed near James's grave at dawn. Evangeline Morrison, 1841 to 1863. Beloved wife, remembered, for her love, not her loss. The suicide attempt stopped after that. Not completely. Raven Rock Overlook is still a dangerous place, and people still come there hurting. But the cluster ended. No more woman in white. No more voices in the fog encouraging people to jump. I still work nights on Skyline Drive. Still patrol that overlook several times a shift. The emergency phones work now. The temperature is normal. Sometimes I think I hear singing on the wind, but it's distant and peaceful, not the eerie music box melody from before. I changed after that night. Started talking about my husband more. About the good parts, not just the loss. Joined a grief support group. Took up hiking on my days off. Started letting people in again. Michael and I got close. We're not together, not yet, anyway, but he's become my best friend. Someone I can call at 2 a.m. when the loneliness gets too heavy. Someone who understands that you can honor the dead without being buried with them. Last month, another ranger from a park in Georgia called me. They were having a problem at a Civil War battlefield, a woman in period dress appearing to visitors, encouraging them to join the dead. Similar story. Different location. I told them what I learned. About listening. About remembering the whole person. About helping ghosts let go of their worst moments. I don't know if I believe in ghosts now. Not really. But I believe in grief so strong it leaves marks on the world. I believe in pain that echoes through time. And I believe in the power of remembering people right for all of who they were, not just how they ended. Sometimes at night, when I'm at the overlook, I look at the mountains and think about Evangeline. I hope she found James again, wherever spirits go. I hope she forgave herself. I hope she's laughing at his terrible jokes somewhere in the light. And when I talk to someone standing too close to that wall, when I use my training and my experience and everything I've learned to pull them back from the edge, I remember what Evangeline said. It matters. Even when it doesn't feel like it. It matters. That's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me working these lonely night shifts, patrolling these dark roads, standing between desperate people and the drop. Because every person I save is a story that gets to continue, a future that doesn't end at the bottom of a cliff, a life that's more than one bad moment. Loneliness calls to loneliness, but so does hope. So does kindness. So does someone showing up at 2 a.m. and saying, "You don't have to do this, you're not alone. Stay." I'm Catherine Ravencrest. I've been a ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 9 years. And I've learned that the scariest ghosts aren't the ones who haunt our parks. They're the ones we carry inside ourselves. The grief, the pain, the loneliness that makes jumping seem reasonable. Those are the real monsters. And fighting them is harder than facing any spirit in the fog. But it's also more important. Because we're all carrying something. We're all standing at our own overlooks, looking down into the darkness, wondering if we can keep going. The answer is yes. You can. And you should. Because your story isn't finished yet. And the world needs to see how it ends, not in tragedy, but in survival. In hope. In the sunrise that comes after the longest night. If you're reading this, if you're standing at your own edge, please hear me. It matters. You matter. Your story matters. And it's not over yet. Stay. Please stay. The sunrise is coming. My name is Daniel Brightfeather, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 14 years. People always ask me about my last name when they see my face. My grandmother was full Cherokee, and she gave me more than just her stories. She gave me eyes that see things most people miss. I work the backcountry areas where the tourists don't go. The places where the old Cherokee paths still wind through trees that were here before America was even a dream. Most days, I love my job. I get to protect something beautiful and wild, but some days, like the one I'm about to tell you about, I remember why my grandmother always said the mountains have long memories. It was September 1978, right around the fall equinox. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the air had that crisp bite that makes you think of campfires and ghost stories. I was stationed near Cataract Falls, where the Cherokee National Forest bumps up against our park boundaries. It's remote out there. The nearest phone is 52 miles away, and the radio only works when the mountains feel like letting it. I'd been working with Dr. Janet Russell and her archaeology team for about a week. They'd found something interesting near one of the old Cherokee sites. Stone structures that didn't match anything we knew about. The stones were big, fitted together so perfectly you couldn't slide a knife blade between them. But here's the weird part. Carbon dating said they were way older than any Cherokee settlement, older than anything that should have been built in North America. Dr. Russell was excited, real excited. The kind of excited that makes scientists forget to eat or sleep. She kept talking about how this could change everything we knew about early civilizations. I wasn't so sure. My grandmother always told me stories about the Kiowa, the old ones who lived here before people like us. She said they were tall and pale, with eyes like moonlight. Most folks called them legends. I was starting to wonder if my grandmother knew more than she let on. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it got around the dig site. You know how forests usually sound, birds calling, insects buzzing, small animals rustling through the leaves. But around those stones, everything went silent. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place. The second thing was how the animals acted. I've been in these mountains long enough to know when something's wrong. Deer tracks would lead right up to the site, then veer away like the animals hit an invisible wall. The local bear population just disappeared from the area entirely. Even the squirrels stayed away. Dr. Russell's team noticed it too, but they figured it was just because of all the human activity. I knew better. Animals don't avoid people like that. They avoid predators. Big ones. On Tuesday morning, I was checking the perimeter when I found the first track. It was in soft mud near the creek, about 200 yards from the dig site. At first, I thought it was a bear print, but when I knelt down to look closer, my blood went cold. It was a footprint. Human-shaped, but stretched out long and narrow. And big, way too big. I put my own boot next to it for comparison. The print was almost twice as long as my size 11 boot. I took pictures and measurements, trying to stay professional. The depth suggested something heavy, but the stride length was impossible. Whatever made this track was walking with steps longer than any human could manage. I followed the trail for about 50 yards before it disappeared on hard ground. That night, I called my cousin Jimmy on the radio. He lives on the reservation and works with the tribal council. I asked him about the old stories, about the Kiowa. He was quiet for a long time before he answered. "Danny," he said, "some stories aren't meant for white man's radios. But if you're asking, maybe you should talk to Elder Thompson. And maybe you should. Do it soon." But I couldn't leave the dig site. Not with Dr. Russell's team working around the clock. They'd started finding artifacts, tools and carvings that didn't match any known Native American culture. Everything was wrong about this place, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. The aurora activity that week was unusual too. We don't usually see the northern lights this far south, but green and silver curtains danced across the sky every night. The local Cherokee elders I managed to reach by radio weren't surprised. They said the lights came when the old ones were stirring. I should have listened to them. Thursday morning, everything changed. I was making my usual rounds when I heard Dr. Russell screaming. Not angry screaming, terrified screaming. I ran toward the dig site, my hand on my radio, ready to call for backup. I found her standing in the middle of the excavation, pointing at something. Her face was white as paper, and her hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold her clipboard. "Daniel," she whispered, "look at the stones." I looked. The stone structures they'd been uncovering had changed. The stones were arranged differently than they had been the day before. Not by much, but enough to notice. These weren't small stones either. Some of them weighed several tons. There was no way they could have moved by themselves. "Did anyone work here last night?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "No," Dr. Russell said. "We stopped at sunset, just like every day. And Daniel, look at this." She led me to the far edge of the dig site. There, pressed into the soft earth, were more of those impossible footprints. But these were fresh, really fresh, and they led in a circle around the entire excavation, like something had been walking around it all night, watching. I got on the radio and called for backup, but all I got was static. The mountains had decided not to cooperate that day. Dr. Russell's satellite phone wasn't working either. She said it had been acting up since Tuesday. "We need to document everything," she said, pulling out her camera. But when she tried to take pictures of the footprints, something weird happened. The camera would focus and click, but when she checked the display, the images showed something different than what we were looking at with our naked eyes. In the pictures, there were shapes. Tall, pale shapes standing around the dig site. Human-like, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with heads that seemed too big for their bodies, and their eyes showed up as bright white spots in the photos, like they were reflecting the camera flash. But we couldn't see anything with our own eyes. Just empty forest. "This is impossible," Dr. Russell kept saying. "Cameras don't lie." I looked at those photos, and I felt something cold crawl up my spine. My grandmother's stories came flooding back. She used to tell me that the Kiowa could hide from human eyes, but not from certain things. Sacred things. Maybe cameras counted. That afternoon, 2 of Dr. Russell's graduate students, Mike and Sarah, went to collect water samples from the creek. They were supposed to be back in an hour. When 2 hours passed with no word, I went looking for them. I found their equipment by the creek bank, sample bottles scattered around, notebooks soaked in the water. But no sign of Mike or Sarah. I called their names until my throat was raw, but the only answer was that heavy silence that had been following us all week. I was about to head back and organize a proper search when I heard it. A sound like humming, but so low I felt it more than heard it. It seemed to come from underground, from the stones themselves. The humming got stronger as the sun went down, and with it came a smell like ozone, like the air right before a lightning strike. That's when I saw them. Just glimpses at first, from the corner of my eye. Tall shapes moving between the trees, always just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look directly, nothing was there. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every passing minute. I made it back to camp just as full darkness fell. Dr. Russell was pacing around the fire, talking to herself in a voice I could barely recognize. "They're magnificent," she was saying. "So tall, so graceful. They've been trying to communicate with me all day. Do you know what this means, Daniel? We're not the first intelligent species on this continent. We never were." "Dr. Russell," I said carefully, "where are Mike and Sarah?" She looked at me with eyes that seemed too bright, too focused. "They went to join them. They understand now. The Kiowa have been waiting so long for someone to listen." My blood turned to ice water. "What did you say?" "The Kiowa. That's what they call themselves. They've been here for thousands of years, Daniel. Tens of thousands. They built the cities under the mountains long before humans crawled out of caves. And now they're waking up." I grabbed her shoulders. "Dr. Russell, where are Mike and Sarah?" But she just smiled and pointed toward the stone circle. In the moonlight, I could see 2 figures standing among the ancient stones. They were tall and perfectly still, like pale statues. And their eyes, God help me, their eyes glowed silver in the darkness. "They're beautiful," Dr. Russell whispered. "And they're coming for all of us." I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing silver eyes staring back at me from the darkness. Dr. Russell had disappeared sometime before dawn. I found her sleeping bag empty, with no sign of struggle. Just gone, like she'd walked into the forest and vanished. I was alone with whatever was out there. My radio still wasn't working, and I was too far from any road to hike out before dark. The smart thing would have been to grab my gear and run, but I couldn't leave without knowing what happened to the others. And something deeper kept me there, something my grandmother had taught me about responsibility to the land and the spirits that lived on it. Friday morning, I decided to explore the stone circle more carefully. In daylight, it looked different than it had the night before. The stones seemed to pulse with a faint energy, and the air around them shimmered like heat waves, even though the morning was cool. I found more tracks, lots of them. They formed patterns around the stones, spirals and circles that made my head hurt to look at too long. And there were other things, strange objects that definitely weren't Cherokee artifacts. They looked like tools, but made of a metal I didn't recognize. Dark, silver stuff that was warm to the touch and seemed to hum with its own power. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was the wind, but wind doesn't call your name. The voices were coming from underground, from beneath the stone circle. They were speaking Cherokee, but in a dialect so old I could barely understand it. What I could make out made my skin crawl. They were talking about the surface world, about the young ones who had forgotten their place, about the time of returning. I backed away from the stones, and that's when I saw movement in the tree line. Not glimpses this time, full, clear shapes moving between the trees. They were tall, maybe 12 feet, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. Their heads were large and elongated, and their limbs seemed too long for their bodies. But it was their eyes that froze me in place. Silver discs that reflected the morning light like mirrors. There were 3 of them that I could see, and they were studying me the way a scientist studies a bug under a microscope. No hostility, just cold, analytical interest. One of them tilted its head, and I heard a voice inside my skull. Asterisk, you see us, asterisk, it said without words. Asterisk. How interesting. Asterisk, I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The voice in my head grew stronger. Asterisk, your blood remembers. You carry the old agreements. Asterisk, what agreements? I managed to whisper. Asterisk, ask your elders, asterisk, the voice replied. Asterisk, ask them about the treaties made before your people forgot how to listen. Asterisk, the connection broke, and I collapsed to my knees. When I looked up, the beings were gone, but I could feel them watching from somewhere I couldn't see. I spent Friday trying to make sense of what was happening. The stone circle was definitely some kind of focal point, but for what? I found more of those strange tools scattered around the site, and when I touched them, images flashed through my mind. Underground cities, carved from living rock. Machines that worked without power sources I could understand. And always, those silver eyes watching from the darkness. The humming got stronger as the day went on. By afternoon, it was so intense I could feel it in my bones. The air around the stones started to bend. That's the only way I can describe it. Reality seemed to warp and twist, showing me glimpses of something else. The forest, as it had been thousands of years ago, when the trees were different and the very shape of the land was changed. That evening, I tried again to reach the outside world. My radio picked up something, but it wasn't any frequency I recognized. It sounded like music, but played on instruments that shouldn't exist. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. As the sun set, the aurora activity started again. But this time the lights seemed to be responding to the humming from underground. They pulsed and swirled in patterns that matched the stone circles. And I realized I was looking at some kind of communication system. The Kitawa were talking to something far away. That's when Dr. Russell came back. She walked out of the forest like she'd been gone for 5 minutes instead of a day. But she was different. Her movements were too smooth, too graceful. Her eyes had taken on a silver tint, and when she spoke, her voice had harmonics that made my ears ring. Daniel, she said, they want to meet with you properly. The Council of the Deep has agreed to speak. Where are Mike and Sarah? I demanded. Safe, she replied. Learning. They volunteered to be the first, you know. The first humans to truly understand what we're dealing with. We're leaving, I said, right now. All of us. Dr. Russell laughed, and the sound was like crystal bells breaking. Oh, Daniel, don't you understand? There's nowhere to run. They've been under these mountains since before your people crossed the land bridge. Since before the ice retreated. This is their world. We're just visiting. Behind her, shapes emerged from the forest. Dozens of them, all tall and pale and moving with that impossible grace. Their silver eyes reflected the aurora light, and I could feel their attention pressing against my mind like a weight. Asterisk. Come, asterisk, the voice in my head said. Asterisk, it is time for the deep knowing. Asterisk, I looked at Dr. Russell, at the beings surrounding us, at the stone circle that pulsed with alien energy, and I realized that whatever happened next, the world was about to change forever. My grandmother's stories hadn't been legends after all. They'd been warnings. The beings led me toward the stone circle, and with each step, the world around me became less real. The forest shimmered and changed, showing me glimpses of what had been here before. Vast cities of white stone, rising from the mountainsides like something from a dream. Gardens that defied the laws of nature, where impossible plants grew in mathematical patterns, and everywhere, the tall pale figures moving through their world with purpose I couldn't understand. "This is what we built," the voice in my head explained. "Before your kind learned to make fire, we carved civilization from the living rock." The leader of the group, I could tell because the others deferred to it, stepped forward. When it spoke, I heard the words both aloud and inside my skull. "I am called Mountain Heart Speaker in your tongue. I was old when your people were young. I have watched your kind spread across our lands like water through cracks in stone." "This is your land?" I asked, surprised I could speak at all. "All land is ours," Mountain Heart Speaker replied. "We shaped it from the raw earth when the world was new. Your people. You are guests who have forgotten the rules of hospitality." "Doctor." Russell stepped closer, her eyes now completely silver. "They've shown me such wonders, Daniel. Cities under the mountains that make our greatest achievements look like children's toys. Technology that works with the earth instead of against it. They could teach us so much. At what cost?" I managed to ask. Mountain Heart Speaker tilted its massive head. "The cost of remembering your place. Your people have grown. Numerous. You build without asking. You take without giving. You forget the agreements made by your ancestors." "What agreements?" The being gestured, and the air around us shimmered. Suddenly, I could see them, ghostly figures from centuries past. Cherokee warriors and elders, standing in council with the tall, pale beings. I could hear their voices across time, speaking words of treaty and promise. "Your people swore to walk lightly on the land," Mountain Heart Speaker explained. "To take only what was needed, to remember that others came before. In return, we would remain hidden, allowing your kind to find your own path." "But now?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "Now the agreement is broken. Your kind covers the earth like a plague. You poison the waters and burn the forests. You forget that this world was never yours alone." The reality around me shifted again, and I saw the truth that terrified me most. The Kituwa weren't alone. Across the world, in hidden places, other ancient races were stirring. Deep dwellers who had built the first cities. Star-touched beings who had walked between worlds. All of them watching as humanity spread like a cancer across the planet they had called home for millions of years. "We tried to warn you," Mountain Heart Speaker continued. "Through your elders, through your dreams. But your people stopped listening. Now we must choose, Treater. Remain hidden and watch you destroy everything or reclaim what was always ours." "And the people here? Dr. Russell, Mike, Sarah? They are transitioning, learning to see as we see. Their minds are being prepared for the new world that is coming." I looked at Dr. Russell, really looked at her. Her humanity was still there, but it was fading, being replaced by something else, something that might once have been human, but was human no longer. "You can't do this," I said. "There has to be another way." Mountain Heart Speaker moved closer, and I felt the full weight of its ancient intelligence pressing against my thoughts. "Perhaps your grandmother's blood runs strong in you. You carry the old knowledge, even if you do not understand it. You could speak for your people. Help them remember their place. And if I refuse, then we will reclaim the surface world as we reclaimed your companions. Humanity will become what they were always meant to be. Caretakers, not conquerors." The air around the stone circle began to vibrate, and I realized that whatever was happening here was spreading. Through the network of underground tunnels, through ley lines I couldn't see but could feel, the awakening was reaching other sites. Other places where the ancient ones slept. "Choose quickly," Mountain Heart Speaker said. "The deep council grows impatient." I closed my eyes and tried to think. My grandmother's voice came back to me, telling stories around the fire, stories about respect and balance, about the responsibility that came with living on borrowed land, but also stories about courage, about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are impossible. "I'll speak for my people," I said finally, "but not as your puppet, as an equal, the way our ancestors did." Mountain Heart Speaker's silver eyes seemed to brighten. You would invoke the old protocols? Yes. The being studied me for a long moment. Around us, the other Kitowa drew closer, their attention focused on this moment like the entire future of two worlds hung in the balance. Which, I realized, it probably did. Very well, Mountain Heart Speaker said. But know this, if your people cannot learn to walk in balance, we will teach them, and the lesson will not be gentle. The world exploded into light. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed in Gatlinburg. They told me a search and rescue team had found me wandering on a hiking trail, delusional and dehydrated. The dig site had been closed due to geological instability, and all the artifacts had been confiscated by federal agents for security reasons. Dr. Russell was in the psychiatric ward 2 floors down. They said she kept talking about underground cities and silver-eyed giants. Mike and Sarah were listed as missing persons, though the official report blamed a hiking accident. Their bodies were never found. But I knew the truth. I could see it now, in ways I couldn't before. The world looked different through my changed eyes. I could see the electromagnetic spectrum, catch glimpses of the underground tunnels that networked beneath the mountains. And sometimes, late at night, I could hear the humming. The Kitowa had kept their end of the bargain. They'd let me go, let me return to my world to serve as their liaison. But they'd changed me in the process, made me into something that could bridge both worlds. I went back to work as a park ranger, but with a new purpose. I started working more closely with the Cherokee Tribal Council, helping to protect the old sites, teaching people about the importance of respecting the land. Most folks thought I was just getting back to my roots after a traumatic experience. They had no idea how right they were. The archaeological site was officially buried under a landslide that occurred the week after I was found. Convenient. But I knew the Kitowa were still down there, watching and waiting. Other sites throughout the Appalachians were showing similar activity. Ancient places stirring to life after centuries of sleep. 3 months later, I got a visit from my cousin Jimmy. He came alone, which meant the tribal council had sent him unofficially. "The elders want to know," he said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table. "Did you meet them? The old ones?" I nodded. "They're real, Jimmy. All of grandmother's stories were real. And they're not happy with how things are going. But they're willing to work with us if we remember how to listen." Jimmy was quiet for a long time. Finally he asked, "What do they want?" "Balance," I said. "Respect. For humanity to remember that we're not the only intelligent species on this planet. And if we can't learn that..." I trailed off, thinking of Dr. Russell's silver eyes. "They'll teach us," Jimmy finished. Yeah. He left that night with a message for the tribal council. Within a month, several archaeological sites had been quietly placed under tribal protection. Scientists stopped poking around ancient Cherokee ceremonial grounds, and in the deep places of the mountains, the humming grew softer. But it never stopped completely. I still work these mountains, still protect these forests. But now I know what I'm really protecting them from, and what's protecting us in return. The Kitowa are still down there, in their cities of white stone, watching, waiting, hoping that humanity can learn to be better guests in a world that was never really ours. Sometimes, on clear nights when the aurora dances overhead, I think about Dr. Russell and the choice she made. Part of me wonders if she was right. Maybe humanity does need to evolve, to become something more than we are. But then I remember my grandmother's words about the importance of staying human, even when faced with things beyond human understanding. About finding balance without losing yourself in the process. The Kitowa gave me a gift and a burden. I can see their world now, overlapping with ours. I can serve as a bridge between two very different kinds of intelligence. But I also carry the weight of knowing how fragile that balance really is. Every day, I watch for signs, changes in animal behavior, unusual electromagnetic readings, places where the humming gets stronger. Because I know that if humanity can't learn to walk lightly on this borrowed earth, the real owners are going to take it back. And next time, they might not be so generous with their terms. The moon-eyed watchers are still watching, still waiting. The question isn't whether they exist, it's whether we can prove worthy of sharing their world. I hope we can. For all our sakes. But I'm not betting on it.